Chapter 408. Yesterday, when I mentioned that Zhan was walking on the surface of the ocean as if he was walking upside down in the sky, I remembered what Wang Xiaobo said. If he didn't wear clothes, he would hang down from the sky. Reminded by a reader, I remembered that he was a eunuch. I couldn't think of a suitable title for this chapter after thinking for a long time. It's really frustrating. Let's just leave it at that. The mountain wind blew into the temple, feeling a bit chilly. Looking at Jingjiu before him, the Qin Emperor's face was extremely pale. He had calmed down a bit by now, but he still couldn't figure out what was going on. The Chu kingdom had been destroyed more than 30 years ago, and the fire in the royal palace had been forgotten by the people. Who would have thought that this person was still alive and hiding in the temple on Buzhou Mountain? The small temple was the residence of the godly commissioner. Besides him, the ruler of the world, nobody could cross the threshold. Staring into Jingjiu's eyes, the Qin Emperor demanded incredulously, "Why are you here?" "I've been here the entire time," said Jingjiu. The Qin Emperor was extremely angry, exclaiming, "It's impossible. I've sent countless men of sacrifice over the years, but none of them came back to Xianyang. Why would the godly commissioner show mercy to you?" By now, Jingjiu had learned where those people who came to disturb his cultivation came from. "They were killed by me," he said. The Qin Emperor was taken aback again. "You killed them?" he asked uncertainly while staring at Jingjiu's eyes. "Where's the godly commissioner?" "There is no godly commissioner here," said Jingjiu. The Qin Emperor revealed an incredulous expression. He looked around the small temple, but he couldn't see anything. Back when Jingjiu set the royal palace on fire, he took advantage of the chaos to leave the capital of the Chu kingdom and came to Buzhou Mountain. Other participants of the Dao competition might have to rely on legends or other clues to find the location of the rumored bronze tripod. But Jingjiu had the help of the blue bird, so he didn't need to do so. Here he saw the bronze tripod, but he didn't see the godly commissioner. It was just a regular bronze tripod. No matter what Jingjiu did to it, it wouldn't respond. After confirming it, Jingjiu didn't pay any more attention to it, but he didn't leave either. He just stayed there. According to the bluebird, this should be a forbidden area, so the bluebird could not find him. This was a good explanation for the outside world. He had lived here for many years. To be precise, he had been lying here for many years. He chopped some bamboo and made a bamboo chair. Usually, he would lie on the empty ground outside the temple. When it rained, he would move it into the temple. Of course, he would not forget to leave the temple door open. In spring, the whole mountain was green. In autumn, the whole mountain was covered with red leaves. When the winter snow fell, people changed into white clothes. In midsummer, there was even a stream that could clear the heart. No matter if it was raining or snowing, or if the sky was clear and boundless, no matter if he was lying on the bamboo chair or soaking his feet in the stream, he was always cultivating. Just like that, he spent a few decades here. It was as simple and even boring as it was in Shima Peak. However, in recent years, people would come to the temple every once in a while, only to be killed by him. The oracle still did not appear. The cauldron was still the same cauldron. He had figured something out. Back when the Qin Emperor trapped and killed the scholar of Qi Kingdom, he was looking at Xianyang City by the cliff's edge. In his cultivation state at the time, it was a bit difficult to kill the Qin Emperor, but it was not impossible. Yet, he didn't go to Xianyang City. Even though his cultivation state was higher now, he had no intention of leaving this place. All he did was wait in silence for the Qin Emperor to show up. He heard the commotion at the foot of Buzhou Mountain the day before, so he knew it was time. As the Qin Emperor bathed and changed clothes at the foot of the mountain and burned the incense to clear his heart, he was doing the same thing. He went to the stream and took a bath. He wiped off his long beard with his hand and put on a new cloth. As a natural cultivation practitioner, he was indifferent to many things. But he had lived in this world for a few decades after all. As such, he displayed a rare seriousness when he was about to leave this world. "You're really smart to hide in this place." The Qin Emperor stared into his eyes, his voice gloomy and angry. "But it's impossible for the oracle to allow you to do so." "As I said, there's no oracle here," Jingjiu said. "I'm waiting for you." The Qin Emperor's voice grew even colder. Waiting to kill me? More than that. Jingjiu held the hilt of the sword in his hand. The sword was short and small, and the sheath was made of wood. Was it possible that the body of the sword was made of the same material? The Qin Emperor's pupils shrank abruptly, and he yelled sternly, "Protect the Emperor!" Before he yelled, his foot had already stomped heavily on the ground. Huh! The stone floor cracked. The tremendous counterforce made his body bounce out of the temple. It was like a violent wind blowing up the fallen leaves. The swordsmen of the Qin kingdom outside the temple had been prepared for this. Some of them stood in front of the Qin emperor, and some of them charged toward Jingjiu. Countless powerful energies enshrouded the peak top, formidable and dreadful. The flying pebbles and dust suddenly stopped in midair. The swaying treetops also stopped in the wind. Those powerful energies seemed to have turned into the icicles, standing still in time. Dozens of illusionary figures appeared on the peak top. It seemed that they had appeared at the same time, but it was hard to tell them apart. Those illusionary figures were all Jingjiu's. He, who had cultivated diligently for dozens of years, was too powerful. In the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror, the participants were in the spiritual soul state, so the speed of the underworld fairy sword could reach an unimaginable level. The stagnant space and time had returned to normal. As the mountain wind whipped up, countless clear and rapid sounds of the sword hacking broke out. Crack! Crack! Those swordsmen of the Qin kingdom were either defending or attacking, but many straight sword marks appeared on their bodies. In the next moment, those swordsmen of the Qin kingdom had turned into square pieces of flesh, scattering on the ground. Standing on the same spot, Jingjiu held the hilt of the sword in his hand, as if he hadn't moved at all. In fact, he had wielded the sword countless times. His sword was so fast that the blood didn't even have time to spurt out from the bodies of those swordsmen of the Qin kingdom. Some of the blood splashed onto the ground. Back when he was in the royal palace of the Chu kingdom, it took him some effort to kill the Grand Secretary Chun and those generals and highly achieved swordsmen. But it was so easy for him to do so now. The Qin emperor's face was pale. As he intended to flee in the air, a bloody line suddenly appeared on his left leg, which was cut off at the knee. The precious soft armor that had once saved his life didn't have any effect this time, and it directly shattered. Jingjiu's sword left a long, bloody wound on his body, from his shoulder to his waist. A great deal of fresh blood sprayed out, turning into a mist and dyeing the white walls of the temple red. Some blood beads fell off the bronze tripod. Jingjiu's white cloth was as white as snow, not a single drop of blood staining it. The Qin emperor fell to the ground after letting out a dreadful scream. It was the first time that Jingjiu drew his sword. His movement was very slow, and the blade of the sword and the sheath made a clear sound of friction. This sword was indeed made of wood. The wooden sword was as light as a piece of paper. It was the only way to match the speed of the underworld fairy sword. Jingjiu placed the wooden sword by the neck of the Qin emperor. He would be able to chop off his head with a little force. Even though it was a wooden sword, it still felt cold at such a close distance. The Qin emperor couldn't care less about the pain coming from his broken leg, as he said in a trembling voice, "Don't kill me." Jingjiu looked at him in silence, waiting for his next words. "The reason the godly commissioner hasn't appeared yet is because you haven't become the ruler of the world, so you aren't qualified to compete for the tripod." The Qin emperor said with a pale face, "Only this emperor has the qualification." "Yes," Jingjiu said calmly. A resolute expression showed in the eyes of the Qin emperor as he said, "Let this emperor live. When this emperor obtains the fairy book, I'll comprehend it with you, and I'll share half of the fairy energy with you." The blood beads on the bronze tripod suddenly rolled up and down, and then formed tiny bubbles, as if they were boiling. It didn't take long for the blood beads to dry up, leaving behind mottled marks that looked like some strange words written with cinnabar. The blood beads seeped into the tripod, and the lines on the surface of the bronze tripod started flowing like the ripples of water, giving off a few puffs of green smoke. A small man could be seen intermittently amid the green smoke. The small man was about 2 feet tall, wearing the uniform of a historian with a pen and paper in his hands. The godly commissioner! An excited flush appeared on the pale face of the Qin emperor as he yelled sternly, "See? This emperor is the chosen one, and only this emperor's blood can invite the godly commissioner." Jingjiao didn't heed him. He looked at the small man amid the green smoke, thinking that the godly commissioner had finally appeared. He had been waiting for this to happen. Otherwise, he would have killed the Qin emperor a long time ago. Now that the godly commissioner had appeared, what was he waiting for? Looking at the side profile of Jingjiao's face, the Qin emperor sensed the cold intent coming from the wooden sword on his neck, and guessed what Jingjiao was thinking, his face turning pale again. Even if you kill this emperor, you still won't get the approval of the godly commissioner. A hint of ruthlessness showed in the eyes of the Qin emperor as he continued, "If you kill me, nobody will get the fairy book. You have hidden it until today. Do you want to take such a risk? If you let me go, I'll give you 1/3 of the fairy energy." Jingjiao still didn't heed him. All he did was look at the small man amid the green smoke, who was the so-called godly commissioner. The godly commissioner was writing something on the paper with the pen in his hand. Sensing Jingjiao's gaze, he lifted his head and said, "Yes, what he said is correct." "The reason," said Jingjiao, "only the ruler of the world can compete for the tripod. You are merely a disabled emperor. What qualification do you have to get my approval?" The godly commissioner said expressionlessly, "You have been here for a few decades, and I haven't come out to meet you. You should know what's going on." "I can kill him now," said Jingjiao. The godly commissioner said, "It's useless even if you kill him. How many of those who succeeded in assassinating the emperor in the history books became the new emperor?" Hearing this conversation, the Qin emperor's expression grew more confident. He said to Jingjiao, "If you don't agree to my terms, this emperor can only give you 1/4 of the fairy energy." Jingjiao still didn't heed him. He said to the godly commissioner, "You are merely a dead object. What qualification do you have to judge the outcome of the Tao competition? I'm the rule of the green sky mirror. There is no life or death here. My judgment is the final decision. You have no choice but to accept it." The godly commissioner turned the paper over and continued, "And I believe nobody will question my fairness. It's because I have evidence to back up my judgment." A great many words were written on the paper, recording the experiences and deeds of the participants in the Tao competition after they entered the illusionary realm. Jingjiao didn't look at those items or the ranking list. He was pondering something in silence. On a tree branch not far away, the bluebird's quick-witted eyes showed the bloody water on the ground, the bronze tripod in the old temple, and worry. She had told Jingjiao that she was the mirror spirit, not the rule. Jingjiao didn't forget what she had said. He was fully aware that he couldn't get her help if he wanted to achieve his goal. He had to face it himself. He had to face the rule directly. "I know you must be dissatisfied with your low ranking, but you were born as an emperor, but you chose to exile yourself. Your achievements in politics, the people's livelihood, and the popularity of the people are all a mess." The godly commissioner commented while pointing to the records on the paper, "Look at what you have done. I have no choice but to accept it." Jingjiao suddenly pulled back the wooden sword. The Qin emperor felt the pressure on his neck lighten. He thought that Jingjiao was about to agree to his terms, the expression in his eyes changing slightly. As he was thinking of how to get more benefits, he didn't expect what would happen next to be beyond his imagination. Jingjiao walked to the front of the bronze tripod with the sword in his hand and said to the godly commissioner, "It might be reasonable according to the standard of your Zhongzhou school, but I'm a disciple of Aoyama." The godly commissioner said, "Since you are participating in the Tao competition, the disciples of Aoyama should also—" Jingjiao didn't let him finish his sentence. "I've been waiting for you on this mountain for a few decades. I didn't wait for you to say all this nonsense. I was waiting for you to hand the tripod to me." The Qin emperor stood up while propping himself against the temple gate. Hearing what Jingjiao said, he displayed a ridiculous expression on his face, wondering if Jingjiao knew what he was doing. The godly commissioner looked at Jingjiao in silence for a long time. "If I didn't hear it wrong, You seem to be threatening me, he said suddenly. Chapter 409. Vast mountains appeared in the sky, as well as a straight road that could be clearly seen from high up in the sky. The cultivation practitioners saw the Qin emperor climb up the high stone steps and arrive at the small temple on the top of the mountain, where they saw the man in white who looked like a fairy. The sound of inhaling cold air could be heard outside the Huin Valley. The people couldn't believe their eyes. Jingjiu had been hiding on Buzhou Mountain, where the godly commissioner lived. That was why the spirit of the green sky mirror couldn't find his whereabouts. But did the rules allow him to do so? What happened next shocked the people again. Dozens of swordsmen of the Qin kingdom who had followed the Qin emperor up the mountain were slashed in half, and the Qin emperor was severely wounded. But it seemed that Jingjiu hadn't even pulled out his sword yet. There were many true cultivation practitioners outside the Huin Valley who had good eyesight. They could tell that Jingjiu had already pulled out his sword, but his speed was too fast, and his movements were unpredictable. Yet, they didn't know what kind of sword style Jingjiu had employed. They were amazed, thinking that this genius swordsman of Aoyama could perform so well even in the illusionary realm. Soon, the godly commissioner appeared and took out a piece of paper. It was a list of the Tao competition in decades. The participants of the Tao competition had just entered the illusionary realm, during which the wind and rain were unstable, the white clouds were overcast, the blue sea was blue, and the Qin emperor was severely wounded by Jingjiu in the temple. 26 names were written at the bottom of the paper. They were the 26 participants of the Tao competition who had entered the illusionary realm. They were ranked according to the time they had stayed in the illusionary realm and the achievements they had made. The names at the top of the list were familiar. Tong Yin ranked 5th, Bai Zhao ranked 4th, Shi Yin ranked 3rd, He Zhan ranked 2nd, and Bai Qianjun ranked 1st. The cultivation practitioners outside the Huin Valley were discussing this matter. They felt it was a pity for He Zhan. If he hadn't suddenly given up his great foundation and traveled overseas, he would have been able to compete with Bai Qianjun based on his ability and tactics in the illusionary realm. It was interesting that the last person on the list was not the participant who had left the illusionary realm first, but the free-traveling practitioner named Jiang Rue. Thinking of that rogue cultivator's ugly performance in the illusion and his tragic ending, the cultivators felt that it was shameless. Aoyama disciple Yao Songzhan raised his brows and asked, "Where is this person?" Someone replied, "He seems to have left a long time ago." He was probably afraid that He Zhan would come out to deal with him. Under the big tree, the Shui Yu nunnery girl listened to these discussions. She looked at Sensei and asked softly, "Are you really going to lock him up?" Sensei said, "I don't understand what you're saying. What was done, but he absolutely could not admit it." The second last on the list was the Kunlun disciple. Jingjiu and Zhuorujui's names appeared in the middle of the list. This surprised many people. The Aoyama disciples raised their eyebrows. In their minds, Big Brother Zhuo had killed the most participants in the Tao competition, and their young senior master was even more outstanding. So why were they ranked in the middle? The Aoyama sect wouldn't agree to the condition under normal circumstances, but they had a more important matter to deal with at the moment. The godly commissioner had made it clear that only Bai Qianjun could obtain the fairy book. What should Jingjiu do then? Should he really agree to the condition of the Qin emperor? Innumerable gazes were fixed on the sky, gazing at Jingjiu in the temple, wondering what he would choose. They thought that Jingjiu would agree to the condition of the Qin emperor. Even Fang Jingtian and Nan Wang, the two important figures of Aoyama, had the same opinion. If Bai Qianjun died by Jingjiu's sword, there would be no winner in this Tao competition, and the fairy book would remain on the Cloud Dream Mountain. As a result, the Zhongzhou school wouldn't suffer any loss. For the sake of the benefit of the Aoyama sect, Jingjiu should agree to the condition of the Qin emperor. Bai Qianjun had predicted this, which was why he was so stubborn. A barrage of surprise screams suddenly broke out outside the Huin Valley. It was because they saw Jingjiu walk to the front of the godly commissioner with the sword in his hand, and then they heard the conversation. Tong Yin and Bai Zhao came to the side of the green sky mirror. and so did Shi Yun and the rest of the participants in the Dao competition. They looked at Jing Jiao and Bai Qianjun, who were sleeping soundly with their eyes closed, waiting for the final result. The glass bell suddenly gave off a crisp, ringing sound. Jing Jiao stood up. The crowd wondered in surprise if the event in the illusionary realm was over. Yet, Jing Jiao's eyes didn't open, and his energy didn't change. It was evident that he had no intention of waking up. What was going on? His spiritual soul was in the illusionary realm. Why could his true body move? Had he connected the real and illusionary worlds? Seeing this, everybody, including Bai Zhao and Tong Yin, was stunned speechless, thinking it was unbelievable. The premise of threatening someone was that they had the ability to hurt or even destroy the other party. Everybody thought it was absurd, like the Qin Emperor. The godly commissioner was a materialized form of the rules of the green sky mirror. So how could Jing Jiao hurt or even destroy him? The rules are the rules that this world abides by. The voice of the godly commissioner was still as calm as ever. Those rules that had to be obeyed couldn't be changed, and they couldn't be erased. For instance, the trees would turn green in spring and red in autumn, and then they would fall down and turn into the rotten mud. For instance, the small streams would flow downwards and form a waterfall when they met the cliffs, and then the water would flow into a pond. For instance, the ice was colder than the water. For instance, the green was greener than the blue. The godly commissioner continued, "My ability is the upper limit of this world, which is also the rule." Jing Jiao said, "Duke Missouri encountered the upper limit back then, so he encountered the thunder punishment. That's right. He knew he couldn't surpass it, so he chose to give up." The godly commissioner continued, "No force in this world can surpass me. It's because I'm that line itself." Jing Jiao said, "So you know nothing about the world beyond that line. What the hell are you thinking?" The Qin Emperor couldn't bear listening to it any longer. He exclaimed while panting, "If he could be defeated, why would we fight so hard for the right to obtain the tripod?" "I didn't fight for it," said Jing Jiao. The Qin Emperor was taken aback. Thinking of what had happened over the years, his face suddenly turned pale. He felt it was unreasonable. "It turns out that you've been crazy from the very beginning. You're a madman." The cultivation practitioners who came to the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror had been cultivating diligently since they were young, and they didn't want to waste any time. It was because they wanted to obtain a higher position and power and eventually become the ruler of the world in order to gain the approval of the godly commissioner. Jing Jiao was born as a prince of the Chu kingdom, and he became the emperor smoothly. Normally, his starting position should be higher than other participants in the Dao competition, but he really didn't do anything. Back then, Duke Missouri was only one step away from heaven, and I was also one step away from heaven. A few decades later, I like to find out which one is higher, the heaven or me. Having said this, Jing Jiao wielded his sword toward the godly commissioner. The godly commissioner didn't move, and his countenance remained unchanged. The thin wooden sword vibrated at an unimaginably high speed, giving off a buzzing sound. It was powerful enough to cut open the hardest object in the world. Yet it couldn't cut open the smoke coming out from the bronze tripod. The wooden sword broke apart when it encountered the smoke, turning into countless powders that dispersed with the wind like green smoke. Amid the green smoke, the godly commissioner looked at Jing Jiao in silence, devoid of pity and sympathy. No matter how powerful one sword work was, it was meaningless in the face of the rules. Jing Jiao was still calm. He put down the remaining sword hilt in his hand and took one step forward, as if he was about to enter the green smoke. The expression on the godly commissioner's face had finally changed. An unimaginable emotion suddenly appeared in his emotionless and senseless eyes. Crack! Crack! Countless sharp sword sounds broke out in the temple, and then spread to the entire Buzhou mountain, reaching everybody's ears. A loud bang resounded. The small temple broke into countless broken pieces, scattering in all directions. The Qin Emperor was covered in blood, lying on the ground in a coma. It was unclear whether he was dead or alive. The sunlight shone on the peak top, but Jing Jiao and the godly commissioner were nowhere to be found. The waterfall in the mountain suddenly flowed backward, and the stream water rose abruptly. The red leaves all over the mountain suddenly turned green. The ice in the extremely cold land suddenly became boiling hot, forming countless clouds and fogs. A strong wind rose over the ocean, but the surface of the ocean was as calm as a mirror. Innumerable clouds and fogs gathered in the sky above Bujou Mountain, becoming as thick as lead, blocking the sun. A straight sword light suddenly appeared in the gloomy sky. Countless heavenly thunders struck down, exuding a formidable power. The lightning illuminated the sky, and then disappeared abruptly. The sword light was still heading upward. Countless figures could be vaguely seen around the sword light, but they were all the same person. Innumerable peculiar phenomena occurred in the world of the green sky mirror. The commotion on Bujou Mountain attracted a great deal of attention. In a royal manor in Hejin County, a middle-aged king looked at the flying sand and pebbles in the sky, his face pale and fearful. In a mountain in the south, the eldest young Master Zhang looked at the wild flowers that had suddenly sprouted in the late autumn and the sword light in the distant sky. He suddenly had a conjecture. He knelt down on the ground, tremblingly, and kowtowed 3 times. Then he raised both of his arms and yelled in an aged voice, "The Emperor is mighty. Kill them all." In the deep part of the ocean, all the fleets had returned to the docks on the islands. Hejan stayed on the surface of the ocean alone, sensing the slight changes of the heavenly Tao, remaining silent with his head lowered. The bluebird was still on the tree branch. Looking at the dark clouds and the sword light that didn't look back, he felt worried. He was worried that Jingjiu wouldn't be able to succeed, and that someone had seen it, which would bring him a lot of trouble in the future. A long time had passed. It seemed to be a long time. In fact, it was very short. The sky suddenly cleared up. It was as blue as the distant ocean. The thunder and lightning stopped flashing, and the sword light vanished without a trace. The small temple had turned into ruins. The bronze tripod was left on the same spot in silence, exuding green smoke. The godly commissioner's figure gradually appeared amid the green smoke, looking much fainter than before. Jingjiu returned to the peak top, bringing a gust of gentle wind with him. As the gentle wind blew over, the green smoke dispersed. The godly commissioner's figure had also dispersed, turning into countless light specks and vanishing without a trace. Jingjiu looked a bit tired. He walked to the front of the bronze tripod after standing on the same spot for a while. Chapter 410. The Qin Emperor woke up. Seeing Jingjiu standing in front of the tripod, he murmured despondently, "It's impossible. How can the rules be broken?" Jingjiu turned his head and shot him a glance, thinking this question was extremely stupid. The purpose of cultivation was to break the rules, get rid of the shackles, and ascend to the Tao. It was impossible to count on the mercy or permission of the heaven to prevent the heavenly thunder from striking down. One had to be unafraid of the heavenly thunder in order to break through the heaven. It was the same in both the real world and the illusionary realm. Since the first day he was reincarnated in the royal palace of the Chu kingdom and heard the words in his mind, he had never thought of winning for the tripod. What he wanted was to win the tripod. It was meaningless to become the ruler of the world and get the approval of the godly commissioner. It was because he still had to rely on the heaven or someone else. As long as he could break through the rules and the upper limit of this world, the tripod would be his. In the eyes of many people, including the Qin Emperor, this was impossible. But in Jingjiu's eyes, it was something all the participants of the Tao competition should be able to achieve. The world in the green sky mirror was stable and unchanging, and the participants of the Tao competition came from the outside world. As long as they could maintain a clear Tao heart, they shouldn't have that line in their eyes. How could the rules of this world bind them when they entered the illusionary world from the real world? This was a simple task to discuss, but it was actually quite difficult. Who could achieve it except for someone like Jingjiu, who had a clear sword heart and could ignore the trials and tribulations of 10,000 years? Even if you can break through the rules, how can you get the fairy book? The Qin Emperor yelled at Jing Jiu's back unwillingly. If you can get the approval of the godly commissioner, he will give the fairy book to you. But who can get it to you now? The decorative patterns on the surface of the bronze tripod exuded a faint fairy intent, meaning that the fairy book of longevity must be inside it. Yet, as the Qin Emperor said, how could Jing Jiu take it out? The rules are the decorative patterns of the world. After they disappear, the truth will be revealed. Jing Jiu ignored the Qin Emperor and said to the bronze tripod, "So you are the fairy book." Having said that, he reached out his hand to take the tripod. When his finger was still a short distance away from the bronze tripod, he suddenly stopped. He pulled back his right hand slowly and looked at the bronze tripod in silence for a long time. It was unclear what he was thinking or waiting for. Looking at his back, the Qin Emperor had a great deal of suspicion and uneasiness in his mind. After an unknown period of time, Jing Jiu switched to his left hand and reached for the bronze cauldron again. Since he had already made his decision, there was no more hesitation. His movements were like the lightest wind and the fastest lightning as he grabbed the bronze cauldron. In the past 30 years, he had looked at the bronze tripod many times in the small temple and held it many times. He was sure that it was just an ordinary bronze tripod, but this time he felt something different. It was an extremely powerful immortal aura. There was also an extremely faint divine sense. The bronze cauldron suddenly disappeared. Jing Jiu's expression became very serious. His left hand clenched into a fist. Countless bright rays of light shot out from his hands, directly illuminating his palms. Even his bones were incomparably clear. The scene was beautiful and strange. Those rays of light carried an extremely simple and elegant immortal aura. They seemed gentle, but it was unknown how much power was hidden within them. Jing Jiu raised his eyebrows, and his body trembled. At this time, the pain he was suffering was far greater than what he showed. This was the impact of an immortal's aura. If it were any other Tao seeker, even Zhao Liu, who had the strongest Taoist heart, would have to let go at this moment. Jing Jiu didn't let go. His face turned paler and paler like a sheet of paper. The cry of a bird came from afar, as if it was a warning. A trickle of blood flowed from the corner of his lips, but he still refused to let go. In the distant deep space, or perhaps even from another world, an extremely clear bell rang. Jing Jiu's eyes became even clearer, almost indifferent as he shouted softly, "Return." There was a soft clap. It was like a book being closed. It was a loud bang. Hundreds of muffled thunders rang out at the same time before dissipating in an instant. Mount Buzhou shook violently, as if it would collapse at any moment. The rubble on the peak of the mountain floated up and spread out in all directions. It was the same for the distant sea of clouds. Countless things were forced to the edge of the space by an invisible and powerful force. The blue became even bluer, and the clear became even clearer. A void appeared at the top of the mountain. Standing in the center of the void, Jing Jiu looked up at the sky. He found that the sky seemed thinner, which meant it was nearer. Then he looked down at the ground and found that the ground seemed thicker, which meant it was nearer. It meant heaven and earth were nearer than before. Then he lowered his head and looked at his left hand. His left hand was still clenched into a fist, a faint fairy intent exuding from his fingers. The fairy intent was very faint, and nobody could perceive it except for him. Now that he had the fairy book in his hand, it was time for him to leave. He lifted his eyes and looked into the distance, from the blue sea in the east to the capital of Chu Kingdom in the west, and then landed on the mountain. He found that the green leaves had turned red again. "Let's go." It was unclear whom he said this to. He took a step toward the void. On the Cloud Dream Mountain, in the Huin Valley, in the Manor Cave, behind the building, by the green sky mirror. Many gazes fell on Jing Jiu. The moment he stood up from the futon, all the participants in the Tao competition knew that something significant was about to happen. Jing Jiu suddenly moved, taking a step forward. Then he opened his eyes. He had woken up. Looking around, he saw Lu Shui, Bai Zhao, Tong Yin, Zhu Rujui, and some participants whose names he couldn't remember. All the participants, including Tong Yin, bowed to him in unison as a congratulatory gesture. Jing Jiu nodded to acknowledge them. After shooting a glance at Lu Shui, he headed toward the outside of the manor cave. The small glass bell let out a crisp ring and followed behind him. Seeing this, the crowd was startled. The participants in the Dao competition felt bewildered after coming back from the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror. Even someone like Shi Yun needed some time to calm down. Nobody could be as calm as Jing Jiu, who didn't need any time to change from the real to the illusionary, as if the past decades didn't exist. Stop right there. An angry yell suddenly burst out in the manor cave. The crowd turned around to look at the source of the yell. Sitting on the futon, Bai Qianjun had already woken up. His eyes were full of anger and resentment. What you did is against the rules. I'm not convinced. Tong Yin furrowed her eyebrows slightly, which made her frown more pronounced. He was aware that it was inconvenient for his young sister to say anything at the moment, so he was about to say something. Unexpectedly, Bai Qianjun had just come out from the illusionary realm, and he still had the brutal temperament of the Qin emperor. He was bewildered and bewildered. He employed the escape method of heaven and earth and arrived behind Jing Jiu, thrusting a fist at him. His fist exuded a faint white glow, exuding a mysterious and powerful energy. Jing Jiu turned around and thrust a simple fist as well. Bai Zhao realized the situation was not good. Jing Jiu didn't know that his big brother had employed his life magic treasure, so he countered it with his fist. He was probably going to suffer a great loss. She was so confident in Jing Jiu that she didn't even think of making a move herself. It was too late for her to take out the Namping clock. The Aoyama sect practiced swordsmanship, while the Zhongzhou school practiced the profound Taoist magic. Neither of them was known for their strength. However, as cultivators, their bodies were as hard as iron, and their fists were as heavy as hammers. Everyone thought that when the two fists met, there would be a thunderous boom. Unexpectedly, the next sound that resounded in the manor cave was crack. The crack was very crisp, like a freshly picked fruit being forcefully broken by a young man, or like a fresh sugar cane being broken from the middle. In fact, the sound was more like an old table and chair being crushed by someone, just like the small temple on the top of Buzhou Mountain that had turned into ruins. Along with the crack, Bai Qianjuan's fist was shattered. His 5 fingers were all broken, and his life magic treasure was broken into pieces. The unimaginably terrifying force traveled up his arm and broke his arm bones and shoulder blades. Even his sternum was cracked into countless cracks. It was as easy as crushing dry weeds and rotten wood. Bai Qianjun was knocked back by the punch and landed heavily in the green sky mirror, spitting out a great deal of fresh blood. It was deathly quiet in the manor cave. The people looked at Jing Jiu in astonishment. It was well known in the whole world, especially after the sword fight with Zhuoru Zhui, that Jing Jiu could be considered the strongest swordsman of the young generation. Yet, Bai Qianjun was a young genius who had been trained by the Zhongzhou school in secret for many years. Normally, the difference in their cultivation states shouldn't be so great. Why did Jing Jiu and Bai Qianjun have such overwhelming power when they punched each other? It was not because of the difference in their cultivation states, nor was it because of the abundant sword source. The people fixed their gazes on Jing Jiu's fist and found that he used his left fist. Tong Yin recalled that Jing Jiu had been holding the fairy book with his left hand ever since he woke up from the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror. Thinking of the last scene in the illusionary realm, he suddenly had a strange conjecture. Did Jing Jiu hold the fairy book in his hand all the time instead of putting it away? I know that I haven't written enough lately, but I've coughed enough. I'll stop being naughty and tell you seriously that the writing is very interesting. Chapter 411. MBSB. Jing Jiu didn't know that she was trying to find a way out of this embarrassing situation, wondering if he should do something to make up for it. Staring into the eyes of Shui Yu Nunnery, Jing Jiu said earnestly, "The name is very nice." Jin Tao felt her face was a bit hot, and she didn't know what to say. Jingjiu had no intention of talking to her, so he continued, I participated in the Tao competition as a disciple of Shui Yu Nunnery. The fairy belongs to Shui Yu Nunnery, but I can't give it to you right now. You have to wait for a while. Hearing this, Zhun Tao was startled, wondering if he really intended to give it to the nunnery. To the nunnery? She was not the only one who was startled, but everybody else present. Nobody thought that Jingjiu was trying to find an excuse to delay, because it was not the style of the Aoyama sect. Even if he didn't give it to Shui Yu Nunnery, nobody could say anything about it. But it took him decades to obtain the fairy. Was he going to give it away like this? It was the fairy. The true fairy magic treasure had an unimaginable significance for the cultivation practitioners, and it was not an ordinary item. The disciples of Aoyama were also startled. In their opinion, the fairy was obtained by the young senior master after decades of perseverance in the Tao competition, so he could do whatever he wanted with it. However, the fairy was too important, and it could affect the overall strength of the sect. Would the other masters agree? S3-1. The retrieved heavenly orb was taken away by Bai Zhenren, and there was no Tai left in the world of the green sky mirror. The everlasting night arrived. The temperature dropped abruptly. The rivers, mountains, trees, birds, and animals were frozen. It was even colder than the snowland in the real world. It was deathly quiet in heaven and earth. There was no sound in this world and no life. Everything remained in the same spots, maintaining their original postures and movements, including the humans. They were waiting silently for the next activation of the illusionary realm. The blue bird flew at a high speed in the dark world, traveling like lightning. Sometimes it hovered above the blue ocean, and sometimes it landed by the lake outside Sanzhou City. Looking at the desolate and dark world, her heart was filled with infinite sorrow. Normally, this was her world, but she had no way to change it. She had no choice but to endure the cycle helplessly every time she opened and closed it over the past tens of thousands of years. The green sky mirror was the magic treasure of the Cloud Dream Mountain, so it had to obey the will of its master. Apart from sadness, she was also feeling wary and uneasy. That was because Bai Zhenren had taken Tai Wai away, but did not summon her for questioning. Jingjiu was able to obtain a deity. Without her help, the immortal should have been able to detect these things. Thinking of Jingjiu obtaining immortality, he left without saying a word. The blue bird was a little angry, thinking that this man was really heartless. She was far worse than Tong Yan. Thinking of these things, she found herself flying to the imperial palace of the Chu kingdom and landing on a corner of the eaves. She had seen many interesting scenes here. For example, the little princess of the Qin kingdom falling into the arms of the prince of the Chu kingdom, and the thin and dark bodyguard dozing off with a sword in his hand. Of course, she had seen more uninteresting scenes here. For example, Duke Missouri failed to draw out his sword in the end. For example, Jingjiu only knew how to cultivate, but he was unwilling to teach her how to obtain true freedom. All of a sudden, she felt that this world had become different. A gust of gentle wind passed through the red walls and the tiles of the imperial palace and her feathers. The wind had no temperature, but it had a scent, a faint salty and fishy smell. The wind came from the ocean. Why was that? Chapter 412. The event on the side of the Aoyama sect had drawn the attention of many people. Hundreds of gazes were fixed on Jingjiu's left hand. Jingjiu's left hand was clenched tightly, not because he was excited or angry. They had all seen the scene when Jingjiu won the tripod in the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror, and they had vaguely guessed what had happened. The news that Bai Qianjun was severely wounded had spread out, and they were more certain that the fairy book of longevity was in Jingjiu's left hand. The crowd was surprised and baffled, wondering why Jingjiu didn't put away the fairy book, but held it in his hand. Wasn't he worried that something might happen to him? A gloomy voice suddenly bellowed. Jingjiu's behavior is obviously against the rules. If it were allowed in the beginning, who wouldn't want to break through the state? The speaker was an elder of the Kunlun sect, and he was talking about Jingjiu winning the tripod. A highly achieved swordsman of Ozawa scoffed. Even if you want to, do you think you can do it? Now that the sects close to the Aoyama sect had spoken, those sects that were loyal to the Zhongzhou school had no choice but to voice their opinions. They all thought that it was unacceptable for Jingjiu to obtain the fairy book in such a way. The scene was a bit chaotic, and it seemed that something big was about to happen. It was then that someone on the observation platform of the Aoyama sect uttered, This came out from the nose. It was rather mild, but not pleasant to hear. It had a hint of laziness and a hint of provocation. Everybody heard this and felt uncomfortable. They lifted their heads and found that the person who uttered the was Zhuo Ruzhui. Zhuo Ruzhui lifted his eyelids and glanced at the faces of those people, saying nothing. Yet, everybody was aware that the he uttered was the famous mantra of the Aoyama sect. Do you people have a death wish? Nobody had a death wish. Thinking of the reputation of Zhuo Ruzhui and his notoriety in the illusionary realm of the Green Sky Mirror, everybody, including the elder of the Kunlun sect, fell silent. It was quiet outside the Huiying Valley. Jingjiu had obtained the fairy book in such a way. It was not up to the Zhongzhou school to decide whether it was against the rules or not. It was believed that the few of the sect masters should be discussing this matter in the deep end of the Cloud Dream Mountain. Jingjiu thought that Lu Xi and Zhuo Ruzhui, the master and the disciple, were indeed similar. Jingjiu didn't pay any attention to them. I have my reasons for insisting on it, he said to Nan Wang. Nan Wang demanded expressionlessly, even though your proposal is so absurd. Contrary to what Cici and others thought, what Jingjiu and Nan Wang talked about was not the matter of giving the fairy book to the Watermoon Nunnery. Unlike what Sensei and others thought, Jingjiu and Nan Wang didn't talk about giving the fairy book to Shuiyu Nunnery. If it were possible, Jingjiu wouldn't talk to Nan Wang, let alone get close to her. However, this matter was a bit troublesome, so he had to meet Lu Xi as soon as possible. Yes, Jingjiu said. Nan Wang shot him a cold glance, saying nothing more. Dozens of thin strings appeared in the sky behind her, and the zither sword broke through the air, heading to an unknown place. This scene attracted more people's attention. Nan Wang said to Fang Jingtian, I'll leave with Jingjiu first. Having said that, the zither sword had already returned after breaking through the air. Dozens of thin strings appeared again. As the strings were retracted, Zhao Leiyu and Jingjiu had already arrived at the peak in front of them. Fang Jingtian furrowed his eyebrows slightly, wondering what had happened. He didn't want to stay here any longer. He instructed the disciples of Aoyama to gather and then left by riding his sword. They didn't leave the Cloud Dream Mountain directly, but the Huiying Valley. If they left after getting the fairy book, it would be too rude and unreasonable, just like what the blue bird had thought of Jingjiu. As the sword lights flashed, the disciples of Aoyama returned to the house of peeled skin. Fang Jingtian's face darkened a bit. He walked along the long corridor to the back of the cliff and arrived in front of Jingjiu's room. Nan Wang sat cross-legged in front of the door. Dozens of shapeless sword strings surrounded the room. Seeing this scene, Fang Jingtian asked, What has happened? He doesn't want to tell me, said Nan Wang. Fang Jingtian said, I just found out that he is ready to give the fairy book to Shuiyu Nunnery. I have no objection, said Nan Wang. Who allowed him to make the decision? Fang Jingtian exclaimed angrily, The fairy book of longevity is the precious treasure left by the great Master Bai, and it's very important for our sect. Even you and I don't have the right to make the decision, let alone him. Nan Wang shot him a glance and said in a mocking tone, Are you going to expel Jingjiu from the mountain gate like Jian Ruyun did? After the sword trial in Aoyama many years ago, Jingjiu had become a talented disciple that the 9 peaks of Aoyama had focused on cultivating in secret. He hadn't let them down. He won first place in the cultivation tournament at the Plum meeting, and now he won first place in the Dao competition. Moreover, he was the personal disciple of the immortal Jingyang and an elder of Shima Peak. Besides the sect master and the sword justice Yuan Qijing, who could challenge him? The expression on Fang Jingtian's face grew even worse as he said, Young sister, I remember that you have always disliked Shinma Peak. Nan Wang said, I don't like it either, but but I'm just telling you the truth." After a moment of silence, Fong Jingtian said, "Let me go in and talk to him." "Nobody can go in now," said Nan Wang. Fong Jingtian pressed. "What on earth has happened?" Nan Wang closed his eyes, paying no more attention to him. Fong Jingtian had no choice but to leave with a flick of his sleeve. Nan Wang opened his eyes and looked at the flowing clouds and gentle breeze outside the railing, asking, "Is there something wrong with the fairy book?" "Yes," Jing Jio's voice rang out behind her. He looked at his left fist, where the fairy book was. Even though it was sealed by his palm, it still exuded a faint fairy energy to the outside world. Fortunately, the fairy energy was too faint, so only he and some divine animals could sense it. He had made a few calculations before entering the illusionary realm, but the results were not good. He had known that there would be some problems in this Dao competition, so he asked Gu Qing to leave first. Now it seemed to be the case, but it was meaningless to think about it. He pushed open the door, took out the bamboo chair, and lay down. Sensing the movement behind him, Nan Wang raised his eyebrows slightly, thinking it was an ugly scene. So he sat cross-legged and floated up, half a foot higher than the bamboo chair. A noise suddenly came from the cliffs outside the railing, as if someone was climbing up. Nan Wang and Jing Jio didn't move, because they had sensed who it was. Jing Jio was still lying on the bamboo chair. Nan Wang was still floating in midair. Lu Shui climbed to the peak top and saw such a strange scene. He was stunned for a while before he came back to his senses. "Greetings, Senior Master Nan." "Greetings, young master." He knelt on the ground and kowtowed 6 times. Jing Jio said, "I asked you to come here because I wanted to see how you were doing. But you climbed the mountain so easily, so you should be fine. You should go back." "Ah," Lu Shui exclaimed, thinking that it was he who told him not to go too far in the illusionary realm. Now that he had come here, how could he leave? An honest man didn't mean that he wasn't smart. He soon realized that something must have happened to his young master, or he might have run into some danger. Otherwise, why would Senior Master Nin stay here to guard him? He said, "I'll stay here to protect you." Jing Jio shot him a glance. Lu Shui understood what Jing Jio meant, but he was still hesitant. "I'll guard him myself. You don't need to worry. Go back to your place as soon as possible," Nan Wang said with a gloomy face. A disciple who should be reflecting on his mistakes in the sword jail is showing off in the world. If this matter is spread out, how can the masters of Aoyama discipline their disciples? Jing Jio said, "It was the sect master who asked him to come here." Lu Shui felt a bit embarrassed, thinking it was true. Since his young master had already obtained the fairy book, it would be better for him to return to the temple as soon as possible. As he was about to leave, he saw that the bamboo chair was badly damaged, so he couldn't help but say, "I planted some bamboos over there. Would you like to make a new one for you?" "That's fine," Jing Jio said. Lu Shui climbed over the railing and climbed down the cliff wall the same way he had come. Thinking of their conversation earlier, Nan Wang felt uncomfortable for some reason. "Where is your other disciple?" he demanded after a sneer. Jing Jio knew that she was asking about Gu Qing, saying, "I asked him to come back in advance." Nan Wang raised his eyebrows and pressed. "You knew that you would win before you entered the temple, and you also knew that the fairy book was problematic." Jing Jio uttered Nan Wang fell silent for a while before saying, "The sect master asked Lu Shui to join the temple as a disciple of the No Mercy sect and to guard the temple in person. Does it mean that he thinks you can win?" Jing Jio uttered again. Nan Wang looked at the scenery outside the cliff wall thoughtfully. "Why hasn't he come back yet?" Jing Jio asked. "He was asking about the sect master of Aoyama, Lu Ci." Nan Wang said, "You didn't follow the rules and took the fairy book, so some people won't accept it. The immortal sect master has to deal with these matters for you. He can't come back so soon." Jing Jio said, "If I'm not mistaken, he will come back earlier than expected." Nan Wang pressed. "Are you only willing to tell the sect master about the problem of the fairy book? You don't even trust me?" She was displeased. She became even angrier when she thought that she, the peak master of Qingrong, had to guard the door for a young disciple. Looking at her back, Jing Jio knew that she was angry. He recalled the large rock on the top of Qingrong Peak many years ago, the flowering tree behind the rock, and the unruly young girl drinking wine on the rock, showing a faint smile on the corners of his mouth. To him, this was a rare emotion. In the next moment, he recalled the song sung by that young girl when she was drunk, and the smile disappeared instantly. In the deepest part of a secret valley on the Cloud Dream Mountain, there was a well-concealed manor cave. The forbidding formation in the manor cave was very powerful. It could even withstand the assault of the swordsmen of Aoyama in the heavenly arrival state for a while. He placed a retrieved heavenly orb in the middle of the stone table with one hand. Countless light rays shot out from the retrieved heavenly orb, illuminating the four walls of the manor cave. The manor cave had a round roof, so the scenes were connected together, looking exceedingly vast. The scenes were the scenes of the participants in the Tao competition in the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror during the past decades. Even the slightest movements and expressions of the participants in the most remote mountain village were recorded in these scenes. The scenes flashed past at a high speed, turning into countless colorful ribbons. But they were no different from the real scenes in the eyes of the emotionless and senseless eyes. There was no need for Baizhenren to ask the bluebird what had happened in the illusionary realm. As long as she wished, she could bring out that world at any time and watch what had happened in the past. The bluebird had no way to conceal anything from her. Baizhenren didn't look at the other participants in the Tao competition, but at Jingjiu and the bluebird. She watched the infant being born soundlessly in the royal palace of the Chu kingdom. She watched him stand up and look at the sky and the earth. She watched him grow up and cultivate, ignoring the affairs of the world. Duke Missouri entered the royal palace, and Jingjiu struck for the first time. "It's fast," Baizhenren murmured to himself, "but it's not fast enough." The scenes continued to move forward at a high speed, and soon came to the last stage. On Buzhou Mountain, the red leaves were as red as fire, and the stone steps looked like jade belts. The Qin emperor climbed up the steps and met Jingjiu in the temple. Dozens of swordsmen of the Qin kingdom were cut into pieces, and the Qin emperor was severely wounded. Jingjiu's hand was still on the hilt of his sword. At the time, the blue bird was looking at the distant mountains, the red leaves, and the Qin emperor. Intentionally or unintentionally, she missed some important scenes. All these scenes were witnessed by Baizhenren. "It's fast enough," she said. A monster eye the size of a jade plate slowly appeared in the shadow of the deep end of the manor cave, cold and dreadful, full of lethal intent. "You caused a great disturbance in the fiend prison, and the old dragon died because of you. A few years later, you came to our center sect to snatch the treasure." Looking at Jingjiu walking toward the empty space in the scene, Baizhenren said expressionlessly, "Do you really think I've forgotten about it?" The following are my reflections on this chapter. I should increase the number of words in this chapter. I'll find a way to make it up to you later. I haven't written too much lately. I didn't say that I would update 2 chapters every day. I'll try my best to recover as soon as possible and update 4,000 words per day. However, judging from my physical condition and the schedule of this month, I feel that it's impossible for me to do so. First of all, I'd like to invite a reader to comment on this chapter. That reader said, "Why did the first emperor of Qin want to conquer the world? It's because he wanted to obtain the tripod. Why did he ask for longevity? It's because he didn't come out." This statement was marvelous, and it hit me right where I needed it. As for the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror, I had intended to write a separate chapter about it, but I thought that I was not the same person in the world of the Tao anymore. It was unnecessary to write so many words in such a straightforward and elegant way. I won't talk too much about the interesting things I liked. I've basically finished the first sentence of the reader's chapter, though it's not the case for my main plot. So I'll say a few simple sentences. The illusionary realm of the green sky mirror, like the being possessed by the demons and the Garden of Zhou, is not a duplicate because it has a close relationship with the main plot. If we look at the later chapters of the Tao toward the sky, we will find that the green sky mirror and the main plot are indeed not related. Yet, it is not a duplicate, and, in my opinion, it is the one that has not deviated from the main plot among the 3 risky and successful attempts. The Tao toward the sky is the result of becoming an immortal in the second life, so is naturally insignificant. Jingjiao didn't have any mental journey, so he couldn't write about the history of the past, nor could he write about himself by comparing the people and events. How to solve this problem? In the illusionary realm, the choices of the participants and the course of history had to be completed. The part in the illusionary realm can be understood as the history of the Tao toward the sky, but it is much simpler than the history that Jing Yang experienced in the real world. It's because there is only Jingjiao in the illusionary realm, but no peace. It is a long book of at least 1,000,000 words about the palace intrigue of the cultivation world, and it is written in a few dozen chapters. It is very economical and straightforward, and it is the state that I pursue when I write about the Tao, so I'm very satisfied. From an aesthetic point of view, I'm also very satisfied. I have carefully written the details in the book in the style and scenes that I like. There are Jiajing, Zhang Jujing, Hu Zongxian, the first emperor, Madame Gouge, Zheng He, Qing Yunian, 2 children debating about the sun, and many other true or false stories. The meaning of recalling is that the title of this chapter has an unforgettable meaning. The chapter of the Tao toward the sky is called Competing with Heaven. In the middle of the chapter, Jingjiao asks himself who is higher between heaven and himself. All of this has something to do with the eagle shooting technique. About 10 days ago, I said that I would get goosebumps even if I played the theme song of the eagle shooting technique. The butterfly jumped out and said, "I will get goosebumps in the future. Do you think you will get younger again?" It's really sad. In addition, it has something to do with Kai Guochuan's song, "The Will of Heaven and the Will of the Man." I strongly recommend it. Chapter 413. The eye as big as a jade plate in the Y shadow was the divine guardian animal of the Zhongzhou school, the unicorn. In 1 second, there was no pop-up window for free reading. Hearing what Bai Junren said, the expression in the unicorn's eyes grew even colder, and his lethal intent was almost tangible. It was evident that he wanted to kill Jingjiao. The fairy lady? If he can't be tempered, he will be a dead man. You don't have to do it yourself. Bai Junren said nonchalantly, "You and I can pretend that we don't know anything about this." The mirror spirit is suspicious. Should we call her out and ask her? The unicorn asked through this spiritual awareness. She is on the verge of becoming a devil. Why bother asking her? Bai Junren reached out his hand and grabbed an object in the night sky. It was the green sky mirror. It was unclear what magic she had used to shrink it into a small disc, which could be held in her hand. A great deal of icy energy came out from between Bai Junren's fingers, and the surface of the green sky mirror froze gradually. This layer of ice looked very thin, but it was actually very hard. Even a fairy sword would have a hard time cutting it open. She waved her hand and pressed the ice-sealed green sky mirror into the forbidden source at the bottom of the Cloud Dream Mountain. S3. The mirror spirit would vanish hundreds of years later, and the illusionary realm would be reactivated. Maybe the green sky mirror would be able to see the light of day again. Seeing this, the unicorn showed a satisfied expression in his eyes, thinking that this was the best way to deal with the situation. Bai Junren left the manor cave and came to the top of the Cloud Dream Mountain. His energy grew colder, as if he had become an indestructible and chilly snowy mountain. The purpose of the Zhongzhou school in this Tao competition was to replace the fairy lady. To find a successor, as long as the successor was strong enough, it didn't matter who the successor was. But if the successor was the successor, if the successor was the disciple of Aoyama, then the successor would become the carrier. The successor and the carrier were only one word different, but their experiences were vastly different. As she said to the unicorn, the successor would be controlled by the fairy lady and become a puppet, unless the other party was able to refine the celestial chi into a puppet. Who in the world could temper the fairy lady? How about her? Thinking about this, an extremely faint vigilance appeared in the depths of her eyes. The gray shadow who had escaped from the fiend prison, the king of the underworld who had been released from the fiend prison, the cultivation practitioner who had pursued the Tao for dozens of years, and the broken void atop the Buzhou Peak. Could it really be you? You're still alive? Then you should die this time, right? The floor, walls, and door frame of the House of P's metamorphosis had countless cuts on them. They looked like densely packed runes, and when the sunlight shone on them, they were reflected into all kinds of strange shapes. Jingjiu lay on the bamboo chair, his right index finger slowly stroking the door frame, feeling the wonderful touch. Looking at Nan Wang's back, he didn't know what to think. Suddenly, a gust of mountain wind arose between the cliffs, blowing away the drifting clouds and breaking open a faintly discernible hole. Indistinctly, one could see a green gown flashing. Nan Wang stood up and bowed. Aoyama's gate, Master Lu Ci, walked in from outside the cliff. He was undoubtedly the most important figure in Chaotian, but there was nothing special about him save for his tall stature. He wore an ordinary cotton cloth, his eyebrows smooth and his expression mild, like a sheathed sword, devoid of any sharpness. Of course, his energy was broad and inclusive, like a sheath of a sword, able to hold everything. Lu Ci waved his hand to signal for Nan Wang to leave. Nan Wang raised his eyebrows slightly. He moved the zither sword and withdrew all the sword strings. Then, he turned around and left with a grunt. Seeing her leave angrily, Lu Ci let out an affectionate smile. Then, he noticed that Jingjiu also had a faint smile on his face. Lu Ci was startled. It was well known that such a faint smile could be considered extremely affectionate for Jingjiu. It seemed that Jingjiu had changed after staying in the green sky mirror for 70 years. Lu Ci waved his sleeve slightly, and the will of the inherited heaven sword came out. A shapeless sword formation enshrouded the House of P's metamorphosis. Even if the unicorn of the Cloud Dream Mountain came close, he wouldn't be able to hear the conversation between Lu Ci and Jingjiu. The longevity fairy? Not the vice. It's the positive? Jingjiu said this directly without any pleasantries or preamble. Lu Ci said, the great grandmaster Bai left behind 3 main and 3 vice grandmasters. Later on, the king of the underworld was suppressed by a positive. The Tao competition has even taken out positive. What do they intend to do? The fairy lady? It was a true magic treasure of the fairy world, and only the Zhongzhou school had it. It was the inheritance left behind by the fairy lady Bai Run when she ascended. The vice? If the fairy energy in the fairy lady was obtained by an ordinary person, it would be enough for them to change their foundation and bones and embark on the path of cultivation. If a cultivation practitioner obtained it, their lifespan would be extended by dozens of years. The positive had more fairy energy. More importantly, it probably contained the fairy will of the great grandmaster Bai, which was the highest method for the cultivation practitioners to comprehend the principles of heaven and earth and to attain the Tao. S3. Lu Ci didn't understand why the Zhongzhou school had to take out a fairy lady as a reward for the Tao competition. It was the reward for the Tao competition. But now he knew it was the positive? It was even more baffling to him. If he were the sect master of Aoyama, he would be reluctant to do so. What did the Zhongzhou school intend to do? The fairy lady was not in this world, and nobody had ever come into contact with the fairy lady. Normally, nobody could guess the thoughts of the Zhongzhou school, but Jingjiu was an exception. He said, the fairy will is a strand of fairy awareness left by Bai Run. She might have come back from the outside world through some kind of Tao method. Lu Ci recalled the scene when the king of the underworld was suppressed. Possession? He asked with a solemn expression. Jingjiu said, that's right. It's similar to what your master thought. So the Zhongzhou school needs to select the strongest and most suitable Taoist body. They need to control it secretly with the fairy awareness, and then wait for the right moment. Lu Ci was puzzled and asked, it's not easy to get out. Why did she come back? Jingjiu said, it's just a strand of fairy awareness. I don't think it's her whole body that came back. Looking at the Cloud Dream Mountains outside the cliff, Lu Ci said while shaking his head, the path of the Sinner sect is always so sticky. Jingjiu said, as far as the Zhongzhou school is concerned, this is a hidden thunder. If something happens in the future and the thunder strikes down, nobody can resist it. Even if she passed the fairy lady by Run who came back to Chaotian was merely a replica, and the cultivation practitioners in Chaotian still couldn't resist her. The fairy lady was still a fairy lady, and 1% of the fairy lady was still a fairy lady. Lucy said, "I'd like to see how powerful the thunder will be when it strikes down." Jing Jiu said, "She can't strike down because she is unlucky. The fairy lady has fallen into my hands." "What are you going to do?" Lucy asked. Jing Jiu said, "I'll temper this fairy lady, of course, so that she can't come back." Lucy said while staring in his eyes, "You know it's a difficult task." Chapter 414 WW XX by Chapter 415 The sect master of Aoyama was in charge of the Tao competition, and the Zhongzhou school had other ideas. Even though the Kunlun sect and other cultivation sects had doubts about the result of the Tao competition, they couldn't change the outcome. Regardless of whether they obtained the Tao competition or obtained the Tao competition, they were still the fairies. The ceremony celebrating the 30,000-year anniversary of the founding of the Zhongzhou school had come to an end. That night, Bai Zhao went to the House of Peeled Skin to see Jing Jiu. She intended to talk to him about something, but she didn't see him, which made her feel uneasy. As she left in silence, Hijio had already left the Cloud Dream Mountain. After Sensei discovered him, she chased after him for 200 miles, but failed to catch up with him. Shi Yun bade farewell to the Zhongzhou school and left in the middle of the night. He went back to Yamatai to sort out the book. Many others had left in advance. They were the participants of the Tao competition who had entered the illusionary realm of the Green Sky Mirror. Though they recalled the dozens of years of the mortal world in front of them like the smoke and clouds, who could really forget all of it? They needed time to stabilize their Tao hearts and obtain what they truly needed from the perception of the mortal world. 3 years later, they might meet again on the Cloud Dream Mountain, or they might not meet again in this life. It all depended on whether they could overcome this obstacle in the end. The next morning, the disciples of Aoyama, led by the two peak masters, Fang Jingtian and Nan Wang, bade farewell to the cultivation colleagues of the Zhongzhou school and left on the sword boat. Bai Zhao didn't see Jing Jiu, feeling uneasy. Hearing the explanation from Fang Jingtian, the cultivation practitioners present learned that Jing Jiu had already left with the immortal sect master of Aoyama. They couldn't help but discuss among themselves, thinking that Jing Jiu didn't look like the winner of the Tao competition, but more like the fairies. Even if the Aoyama sect intended to save some face for the Zhongzhou school, they didn't have to keep such a low profile. Under the light of the morning sun, a white cloud drifted away from the Cloud Dream Mountain, like a lotus flower drifting away on the clear water surface. This place was still within the range of the great formation of Cloud Dream. Perhaps to show respect to Zhongzhou school, the cloud didn't float very fast. It could be seen clearly that it wasn't a real cloud condensed from fog, but a sword cloud woven by innumerable extremely strong sword wills. Lucy and Jing Jiu stood behind the clouds, maintaining the same posture with their hands clasped behind their back, looking straight ahead. Their figures were set off by the distant morning sun, and they looked like real immortals. The sword of Mandate of Heaven was stuck between the steels on Tianguang Peak. It would not leave Aoyama unless it was something serious. During the battle on the cloud platform, when Lu Xi captured Shiwang's son alive, he brought the inherited heaven sword with him. But he didn't bring it with him this time. Because of Jing Jiu, he had to ride the cloud sword back to the mountain. Of course, his speed was slower. Jing Jiu's iron sword was much faster than the sword cloud, but Lu Xi thought that the sword was too dirty. Since they had nothing else to do, it would be fine as long as they could leave Cloud Dream Mountain. The sword cloud drifted like this, and the two of them occasionally chatted about something unimportant. The Western Sea Sword School is declining, and the old devil of the foggy island won't come out. You should learn from your master about scheming and scheming. What is the child of that person in the snowland? If you don't know, who would know? I don't even know where my master is hiding. Based on his temperament, It's impossible for him to hide forever. All we have to do is wait. Since this is a scheme of the Sinner's sect, why does the unicorn want to follow us? I think he is unwilling to accept the fact that he is the fairy lady. Even if he is robbed, it is still a good thing. He is unwilling to accept the fact that the old dragon was killed by you. So he wants to kill you to avenge him. A faint energy could be vaguely sensed in the sky, dyed red by the morning sunlight. The energy was ancient and sacred, exceedingly formidable. It was evident that the person intended to conceal it, but it was impossible to conceal it from the two of them. The two of them knew who it was without even taking a look at it. Lucy, of course, knew that the figure who had escaped from the fiend prison was Jingjiu. He could also predict that the so-called Elder of Aoyama, who had rescued Guodong in the West Ocean, was Jingjiu. He was well aware of how powerful the sword of Jian Shilai was, and Guodong was wounded severely, so Jingjiu had no choice but to compete for the fairy lady. As such, he asked Lu Shui to join the Dao competition as a disciple of the No Mercy sect, and then he went to the Cloud Dream Mountain in person. What the Aoyama sect practiced was the sword work, which emphasized on the principle that everything happened in a flash, and that they aimed to kill with one strike, so they had to calculate all the factors before striking. It was hard to calculate everything in the world, but it was easier to calculate what the colleagues of the same sect were thinking. As such, the cooperation between the colleagues of the Aoyama sect didn't need much explanation. Back when Zhao Liu and Lu Shui didn't have any contact with each other, she could use Tong Yan's scheme to kill Lo Huainan in one fell swoop. It was the same kind of scheme. The old dragon was killed by the king of the underworld. It had nothing to do with me. Jingjiu gave an explanation. This was a rare occurrence for him. He went to the fiend prison to meet the king of the underworld in private and caused such a commotion, which would indeed bring trouble to the Aoyama sect. Though Lu Ci had a lower status, he was still the sect master. Of course, this explanation was more like an order. Lu Ci sighed. But the unicorn has to believe it first. Jingjiu said, I won't come to the Cloud Dream Mountain in the future. It doesn't matter if he believes it or not. The sword cloud had drifted out of the Cloud Dream Mountain and arrived in the sky above Yu County. The energy of the unicorn halted at the edge of the great formation of Cloud Dream, and he didn't follow Jingjiu any further. If he still followed Lu Ci, he would be regarded as disrespectful to the Aoyama sect or as a threat. If the Aoyama sect hit a guard in the mountains below and suddenly launched a counterattack, the unicorn would suffer a great loss. The unicorn wanted to kill Jingjiu, so he wouldn't be satisfied. In fact, the unicorn would bring Jingjiu to the fairyland. In fact, it wouldn't be kept a secret for long. There would be some disturbances on the way back to the Aoyama sect. Jingjiu wasn't afraid of it. Traveling with Lu Ci was much better than traveling with White Ghost. They could go anywhere in the world except for the deep part of the snowland. Yet, Jingjiu thought that it would be troublesome to deal with them by turns. He reached out the forefinger of his right hand and poked a small hole on the shapeless wills of the sword on his left fist. A faint fairy intent seeped out from the small hole and then sprinkled down to the ground from the sky. There were many mountains around Yu County, with steep peaks and deep forests. There were many narrow cracks in the ground where many demons and highly achieved swordsmen of the deviant sects hid, and there might even be some powerful demons from the distant ancient times. Though these demons were not as formidable as the unicorn, they were still quite formidable when there were so many of them. The fairy intent sprinkled over the human world like the raindrops. There was a commotion in the mountains, and at least hundreds of powerful energies emerged. The demons and deviant practitioners looked up at the sky, drooling. Even though they were fully aware that the sword cloud in the sky was extraordinary, they still couldn't help but feel a strong desire and greed for it. Lu Ci knew that the unicorn was watching them from behind. He reached out his hand to seal Jingjiu's left hand again, and then stepped on the sword cloud to scatter. He looked down at the ground. His line of sight swept over the mountains like a real, huge sword, exuding an exceedingly powerful energy. Then he uttered, This was cold, emotionless, and contemptuous. It was dragged out a bit longer, and it made a turn in the end, clearly expressing his disdain and intention to invite Jing Jiu to his death. The strongest swordsman in Chaotian was present, so the demons didn't dare stay any longer. They knelt down in tandem to show their submission, not daring to be his enemy. Some of the powerful demons sneaked into the underground as quickly as possible and fled through the hidden veins, fearing that they would be killed by the sword. The sword cloud gathered again, hiding the two of them in the sky. Thinking of Urujui leaning against the cliff wall lazily, Jing Jiu felt it was a pity, saying, "That disciple of yours is not bad, but he's becoming more and more like you." "What's wrong with my disciple, Master Xiao?" Lu Ci asked nonchalantly. Jing Jiu said, "You're used to striking only when everything is in order, just like what you did back then. You can't do it this way. It's like the Tao of the center sect. It's too clingy." This was a straightforward comment, especially when he mentioned the Tao of the center sect, which was unacceptable for the people of Aoyama. Lu Ci yelled unpleasantly, "Do you want to be the sect master?" "No," Jing Jiu said without hesitation. Lu Ci said, "Don't talk so much then." It grew quiet in the sky. The wild geese could be heard in the distance. After passing Yu County, Huayong, and crossing the mud-like muddy river in Nanhezu, Aoyama was right in front of them. The earth suddenly swelled up, giving rise to countless mountain peaks. Mist and airflow flowed down from the peaks and turned into clouds in front of the mountains, drowning the whole town. Looking from the sky, the clouds and mist looked like countless white ribbons dancing among the green peaks, looking very beautiful. After Bai Zhao recultivated his Tao method, he wore white ribbons on his arms. When he flew, he looked like a real fairy. The little princess of the Qin kingdom also dressed like this. Jing Jiu suddenly remembered that there was hot pot in the illusionary realm, but he didn't know what it tasted like, so he said, "I want to go down and eat hot pot." Lu Ci raised his eyebrows speechlessly, thinking, "You have a fairy in your hand? Aoyama is right in front of you, but you don't want to go back but want to eat hot pot?" There were a few restaurants in Cloudy Town, but not many of them had private rooms and served hot pot. As such, Jing Jiu took Lu Ci to the same restaurant. The owner of the restaurant had died of illness, and now it was his third son who took over. The furnishings in the restaurant were also very old, so it had a reputation of being a time-honored restaurant. The difference between cultivation practitioners and mortals was that the passage of time made people feel hopeless and sad. The yuanyang pot was placed on the table, and a few simple plates of vegetables and radishes were placed next to it. The owner took the golden leaves and went downstairs. Thinking of the past events that his father had told him many times, he breathed heavily for a dozen times before he slowly recovered. He waved his hand to signal the owner to close the door and stop serving customers. It turned out that the immortal masters of Aoyama really liked to eat their own hot pot. The red soup was still boiling, but the white soup was almost dry. Jing Jiu didn't move his chopsticks, but Lu Ci didn't think it was strange. Many years ago, when he ate hot pot in Shangda Peak, Jing Jiu ate less and less hot pot until he didn't eat it anymore. Only in winter, when Yuan Qijing used fresh ingredients from Lelong Commandery as a side stove, did he occasionally move his chopsticks. The soup was almost dry, and the hot pot was almost finished. It was time to get down to business. When he escaped from the sword jail with the body of an underworld disciple, he was intercepted by Zhao Liu here and then killed by a disciple surnamed Meng. In fact, he took the opportunity to escape. Jing Jiu said, "That disciple surnamed Meng has been locked up in Shangda Peak for so many years. Did he find out anything from the interrogation?" Lu Ci said, "He said he was instructed by younger brother Fong." Jing Jiu asked, "What do you think?" Lu Ci said, "Let's wait and see." Jing Jiu said, "As I said earlier, you are used to acting only when everything is ready. This won't do." Lu Ci said, "If you can do it, then do it. I'll give you the title of Sect Master." Jing Jiu fell silent. Lu Ci said, "Then don't think too much." Jing Jiu said, "Don't you want to do anything? In this story, the three of us are the villains who deceived our master and killed our ancestors. What's wrong with younger brother Fong wanting to kill us to avenge our master? Lucy, I said calmly. What can I do when faced with such a reasonable thing? You could do a lot of things. For example, if you find out that the Thunder Soul would came from Bihu Peak, you can kill Lei Poyan to silence him. Or, even if he had the Thunder Soul wood, he couldn't break my sword formation. Only you can. Jing Jiu raised his left hand and looked at the layers of sword wills bound on it, asking calmly, Did you let him go? The hot pot was really about to dry up. The white soup had all turned into steam, filling the whole room and then the whole restaurant. Exclamations suddenly came from a street. Cloudy Town was full of clouds and fog, and the tourists from afar were very excited. The residents who had lived here all their lives were upset. The clouds and fog were so confusing that they couldn't see the road clearly, and it was easy for them to trip. They couldn't see the movements in the steamer clearly, and they couldn't tell if the steam buns were cooked or not. People from different positions naturally had different feelings. It was the same for immortals and mortals. After a moment of silence, Lu Si asked again, Do you want to be the sect master? Jing Jiu still said without hesitation, No. Then why did you ask so many questions? Chapter 416. The white soup in the pot had finally dried up. A few pieces of softened green onions dangled beside the pot, looking like Joie Rougeoui's eyelids. When Lu Si left, his sleeve stirred up a gust of wind that blew out the fire at the bottom of the pot. There was no need to worry about the green onions being burned. The mist in the private rooms and restaurants was also cleared. The cool breeze blew through the door and onto the street, dispersing all the clouds and mist. The chilly sunlight shone on Cloudy Town. For the first time, the desolation and loftiness of late autumn were vividly displayed in front of people. The tourists from other places were fine, but the residents of the town were stunned. Most of them had never seen the scene of the clouds and mist dispersing. The people quickly realized that this must be the marvelous Taoist magic of the immortal master of Aoyama. They knelt on the ground immediately. The clouds and mist came from the peaks of Aoyama. It was the natural flow of water vapor between heaven and earth. It was also related to the Great Formation. The Great Formation of Aoyama was activated. The light in the sky changed slightly, and the color of the red trees and green forests among the peaks changed slightly. The disciples by the stream of sword washing and among the peaks raised their heads to look at the sky. When they saw a cloud of sword, they knew that the sect leader had returned from the Cloud Dream Mountain. They all bowed to him. The cloud of sword did not land on Tianguang Peak. Instead, it floated toward Shenma Peak, which was further away. The restrictive formation of Shenma Peak was activated automatically. The trees on the mountain swayed slightly, as if they were welcoming something. The disciples of Aoyama were surprised. They thought of a possibility and couldn't help but feel pleasantly surprised. The youngest uncle was back. In the past, Liangwang Peak was the place that the young disciples of Aoyama were most proud of and admired. Now, this position had been replaced by Shenma Peak. Shenma Peak had Zhao Leiyu and Gu Qing, who were about the same age as them, but they were already famous, not to mention that Shenma Peak had a junior martial uncle. 15 years had passed since the plum meeting. Jing Jiu had been trapped in the snowland for 6 years. Later, in order to break through the sword ghost, he snuck into the demonic prison in Zhaoga City and cultivated with the king of the underworld for 3 years. After he came out of the plum meeting, he accompanied Guodong to enjoy the spring scenery and appreciate the autumn. In fact, he had stayed in Aoyama for no more than 3 years in the last 15 years. However, his name was not forgotten by the disciples of Aoyama. Instead, it became even more legendary. Zhao Leiyu lost to Joie Rougeoui in the sword trial in Aoyama. But in the blink of an eye, youngest martial uncle won it back in the Cloud Dream Mountain and got first place in the Dao querying competition of Zhongzhou School. It was snowing on the peak of Shangda Peak. Young sister Yushan and a few big brothers who were on duty sat in the Taoist hall, chatting while eating pine nuts. They suddenly heard the commotion outside and walked out of the hall. Seeing the sword cloud landing on the top of Shenma Peak, Yushan's small face was full of surprise and delight. She stuffed the pine nuts in her hand into the bosom of a big brother next to her, saying, I have something to attend to. I have to go now. Seeing her figure turn into a band of snowy smoke on the mountain path, that big brother sighed. Young sister is always like this. I don't even know which peak she belongs to. The sword cloud landed on the peak top and dispersed into countless strands of cloud energy, merging with the layers of clouds in the cliffs. It was hard to distinguish them from each other anymore. It had been years since they last met in Aoyama. Other practitioners might feel a little sentimental, but Jingjiu had no such thoughts. He just felt that something had changed. Looking at the Taoist hall and the manor cave on the peak top and listening to the monkeys' cries coming from the cliffs, Jingjiu found that he spent less and less time in Aoyama in this life and more time in the human world. He told himself that it was all Zhao Liu's fault for insisting on traveling in the human world. The cheerful cries of the monkeys in the cliffs stopped abruptly, and the rustling sound in the forest suddenly disappeared. They had come to the peak top to welcome Jingjiu, but they were too afraid to move forward after noticing Lu Xi. Gu Qing and Yuan Chu walked out of the manor cave. Before they could bow to Jingjiu, they saw Lu Xi and hurriedly bowed to him. They had never seen the immortal sect master before, but they had seen the portrait in that small building when they entered the inner sect from the outer sect. Which disciple of Aoyama dared not to remember that face? Lu Xi motioned for them to stand up and was about to say some gentle words of encouragement to them. Gu Qing was quite famous now, and he would probably become the royal preceptor in the future. As for this young man Yuan from Lelong County, he also had a good background. The sound of fallen leaves being stepped on suddenly broke out on the peak top. The white cat strolled out of the cave, his long hair combed clean and smooth. It was unclear whether it was the work of Yuan Chu or a cold cicada hiding in his hair. The Lord White Ghost, the principal guard of Aoyama, stepped on the fallen leaves on purpose, reminding others to look at him and look at him. Lu Xi glanced at him and then turned to Jingjiu, saying, "As the principal guard of Aoyama, I can't guard the door for you all the time." Jingjiu said, "If the principal guard of Aoyama doesn't come to guard me, then who should he guard?" The white cat narrowed his eyes slightly, wondering why the two of them didn't pretend to be familiar with each other. It was so boring. Lu Xi didn't know how to answer Jingjiu's words, and he didn't want to argue back in front of the disciples of the younger generation like Gu Qing and Yuan Chu, so he left with a bitter smile. While Gu Qing and Yuan Chu were still in shock, the white cat had already stepped forward and rubbed against Jingjiu's calf affectionately. Jingjiu knew what the cat meant, so he reached out his right index finger and wrote a few lines on a leaf on the ground. Then he grabbed the leaf and was about to give it to the monkey, but he gave it to Yuan Chu after some thought, saying, "Give it to Yuan Qijing." Yuan Chu was a bit nervous. He looked at Gu Qing's smiling face and then at the Lord White Ghost's half-smiling eyes, thinking that he didn't need to pretend anymore. He left the peak on his sword, but he didn't dare to go directly to his destination. Instead, he followed the rules of the Shangda Peak and stopped at the foot of the mountain, then walked up. After a few steps, he saw junior sister Yushan rushing down like a snowstorm. He was a bit surprised and asked, "Junior sister, where are you going?" Yushan was also surprised to see him and said, "I'm going to see Uncle Master." "Why are you here?" Yuan Chu handed the leaf in his hand to her and said, "Bring a letter to him. Put it under the stone where we watched the stars that night." Yushan spat shyly and said, "I don't care what relationship you have with the masters in the peak. You could deliver it yourself. I'm going to the Shima Peak." Yuan Chu sighed and said, "Uncle Master is so lazy. How would he be willing to accept another disciple? Even if you want to transfer to the peak, no one will accept you." Yushan's little face was full of confidence as she said, "It was Uncle Master Jing who asked me to become a disciple of the Shangda Peak during the sword trial. He has no reason to ignore me." Yuan Chu said helplessly, "Don't make trouble. At least don't go there today. Uncle Master is obviously in a bad mood. He keeps clenching his fists as if he wants to hit someone." Yushan opened her eyes wide and thought that although Uncle Master was cold, he never lost his temper with others. What had happened? Yuan Chu said with a bitter face, "I don't know. Master is in closed-door training. Who would dare to ask?" While this pair of innocent senior brother and junior sister were making boring guesses at the foot of the Shangda Peak, something really important was happening at the top of the Shinma Peak. Jing Jiao stood at the edge of the cliff and looked at the familiar sea of clouds for a while. He felt a bit depressed when he thought of what Lu Xi had said along the way. He turned to Gu Qing and said, "I have something to tell you." "Your disciple is listening," Gu Qing said seriously. "You're going to be the sect master from now on. You have to practice the inherited heaven sword well. Other things can wait." Jing Jiao said, "And your sword is really not good enough. Don't always think that the sword will rise with the person. I'll find some time to change it for you." Gu Qing had always been cautious, calm, and tranquil in times of trouble, but he was still stunned at this moment. He knew that his master had a profound background in both Aoyama and the cultivation world, but the matter of being the sect master, could a disciple be a disciple just because his master said so? Jing Jiao paid no attention to the somewhat despondent Lu Xi. He walked in the manor cave and came to the stone door that was tightly shut. Zhao Leu had been in closed-door training here ever since she was defeated by Zhuo Ruzhui. Staying behind closed doors was a sacred thing for many cultivation practitioners. Nobody dared to disturb Zhuo Ruzhui when he stayed behind closed doors on Tianguang Peak. It was probably because he had stayed behind closed doors too many times that Jing Jiao didn't think so. He had told Zhao Leu and the others that the people on Shinma Peak would still communicate with the outside world when they stayed behind closed doors. They would even come out to listen to the tunes from Qingrong Peak when they were bored. Sensing his presence, the stone door opened slowly. Zhao Leu walked out along with some smoke and dust. They hadn't seen each other for a few years. "How are you?" Jing Jiao and Zhao Leu didn't ask these questions. They just eyed each other. Zhao Leu wondered why Gu Qing still carried the iron sword on his back when he said that he had entered the middle state of the free travel. Jing Jiao found that she had completed the initial state of the free travel and was on the verge of breaking through the state. He was satisfied with this result, but he didn't feel satisfied with her appearance. Zhao Leu's short hair had become long hair that hung down to her shoulders, but she didn't take care of it. Her hair looked messy, much worse than Lu Ada's. "Where's the comb?" Jing Jiao asked. He didn't forget to take the bamboo chair with him when he left Aoyama, and he didn't forget to leave the wooden comb behind. Zhao Leu said carelessly, "I don't see her anyway." But she could see her now. She reached out her hand to grab some water from the air and wiped it on her black hair. "Come with me." Jing Jiao led her out of the manor cave, heading to a higher spot on the peak top. Gu Qing was still standing by the cliff's edge like a clay statue, and the white cat followed behind him while shaking his head. There was a cave on the highest spot on the peak top. The cave was hollowed out so that it could receive the starlight and the energy of heaven and earth. It was here that Jing Jiao used the sword traveling technique to inform his friends overseas to keep an eye on the old devil of the Foggy Island. With a thought, he summoned the thoughtless sword to take a look. Zhao Leu clutched her chest and glared at him. No matter how much trust he had, it was still strange for a sword cultivator to take something without asking. The color of the thoughtless sword was indeed a bit different. He turned to look at Zhao Leu and asked, "Why did you suppress your sword will?" Zhao Leu replied, "Zhuo Ruzhui is a junior, and me fighting him is bullying him. If I used the thoughtless sword, it would be even more unfair," Jing Jiao said. "Don't think too much about it outside," Zhao Leu replied. "If he's an enemy, I'll kill him with one strike." Jing Jiao really liked the idea of killing with one strike. He reached out to touch her head and found that it was still a bit wet. Zhao Leu's hand went into her sleeve, as if she was taking something. Jing Jiao didn't notice and waved his right hand to release something. Zhao Leu was alarmed. She couldn't even see those things. Lu Ada was also alarmed, and his hair stood on end. He had smelled the scent of those things. They were the mosquitoes in the fiend prison. Huh! Cold cicada fell down from the cat's hair and onto the ground. When Lu Xi was around, Cold Cicada was scared to death, so he didn't dare stick his head out. Now that he landed on the ground, he looked at the sky curiously, his strange and translucent eyes rolling around, as if he was staring at something. Jingjiao felt surprised because he didn't expect this small beetle in the snowland to be able to see those mosquitoes. Of course, Cold Cicada didn't see those mosquitoes, but sensed the existence of those mosquitoes through their heat. Jingjiao found it interesting and said to Cold Cicada, "If you can control them well, I'll let you use them." Cold Cicada was taken aback at first, but then it suddenly turned over and pointed its belly at Jingjiao to express its submission and gratitude. In the next moment, its thin limbs rubbed against each other at a high speed, making a sizzling sound. It was quite pleasant to hear, like the tapping of soft jade, extremely joyful. White Ghost was crouching outside the cave. Cold Cicada led those mosquitoes to guard the surroundings. The forbidding formation of a Shinma peak had been opened. Nobody could hear the conversation between Jingjiao and Zhao Lei. Even Lu Xi and Yuan Qijing couldn't do it. "I have something to tell you," said Jingjiao. Zhao Lei nodded nervously. There were only the two of them in the quiet manor cave. "Sit down," said Jingjiao. Zhao Lei sat down in front of Jingjiao. She got along with Jingjiao quite naturally in the outside world, just like what she had done in the past years. But she behaved more and more obediently toward Jingjiao when they were alone. "I've actually forgotten something," said Jingjiao. Zhao Lei wondered if he was going to explain it to her. She said uneasily, "I'm a bit nervous." She had walked on the Sword Peak, walked in the human world, killed a group of monsters with her sword, been assassinated by Bulo Lin, and then assassinated Lo Huainan. She had never been nervous no matter what happened. She felt nervous when Jingjiao told her about the past. How could she get rid of this nervousness? Zhao Lei took out a comb from her sleeve and handed it to Jingjiao, and then turned around. She didn't have to look at his eyes in this way. Jingjiao took the comb with his right hand and started combing her hair. The dark comb slowly slid through her black hair, bringing with it a kind of wonderful charm. This wooden comb was brought back by Taiping from the underworld, and he gave it to me. Jingjiao sensed that Zhao Lei's body stiffened for a moment. It was also because of Taiping that I could find the king of the underworld in the fiend prison. Jingjiao told her what had happened in the last few years in detail. Gu Qing had told her some of what had happened after he returned to Aoyama, but Jingjiao was the only one who knew the details of what had happened in the fiend prison and what had happened at the West Ocean. In the end, Jingjiao told her about the Dao competition at the Zhongzhou school and how he obtained the fairy book. It seemed to have happened a long time ago, but it was only yesterday that he obtained the tripod on Buzhou Mountain and took a step into the empty space. Zhao Lei was startled, asking, "Is the fairy book being held by your left hand right now?" "Yes. Besides the fairy energy in the fairy book, there's also a fairy awareness left by Bai Run." Jingjiao continued, "As I told you before, Jingyang has succeeded in ascending." Zhao Lei remembered that Jingjiao had indeed said so a long time ago, wondering why he had come back. He had stayed in that broader world for a while, and then he encountered a problem, so he had to return to the human world. Jingjiao continued, "I didn't know what the problem was until I held this fairy book. Is it because you're familiar with the fairy energy in the fairy book?" asked Zhao Lei. Jingjiao said, "It's not the fairy energy, but the fairy awareness left by Bai Run. It feels familiar." It became very quiet in the manor cave. After a moment of silence, Zhao Lei said, "Are you suspecting that it was the Zhongzhou school that did something to the immortal Jingyang when he ascended instead of Taiping Zhenren? I told you by the bank of the muddy river that my investigation of Taiping Zhenren had nothing to do with Jingyang's ascension, but it doesn't mean that he has nothing to do with it. He has the motive and the ability," said Jingjiao. Zhao Lei said, "You said there was nothing wrong with the great formation of the dispersing smoke and clouds. When Jingyang ascended, he set off toward the sky from this manor cave. The great formation of the dispersing smoke and clouds was also here. There's nothing wrong with the great formation of the dispersing smoke and clouds. Nobody in the peaks of Aoyama could have done anything to it, but the great formation itself might be wrong." After a moment of silence, Jingjiao said, "That is to say, When he started teaching Jingyang the magic methods 1,000 years ago, he had never intended for Jingyang to ascend successfully. If that was the case, it would be a sad and meaningless part of the past. Zhao Leo didn't want it to be like this, saying softly, "Maybe it was the fairy lady Bai Run who sneak-attacked the immortal Jingyang in the immortal realm, and it had nothing to do with Taiping Jinren." Jing Jiao shook his head and said, "If there was nothing wrong with the Great Formation, how could Bai Run be a match for Jingyang after he ascended?" Chapter 417. Zhao Leu arched her eyebrows, thinking it was understandable, but she was still puzzled, asking, "But why did she want to borrow the fairy book to come back?" This was also something Lu Ci couldn't figure out. The cultivation practitioners pursued ascension and became the fairies. Why did she want to go back to the same place when she had already become the fairies? Jing Jiao said, "Maybe it's because of fear." Zhao Leu said, she was afraid that the immortal Jingyang was still alive and would retaliate against the disciples of Cloud Dream Mountain after discovering the truth. So she wanted to use her replica to come back and keep an eye on you. Jing Jiao said, "It's not the true fear. She left the fairy book as a backup plan or a way back." Zhao Leu asked earnestly, "What is she afraid of?" Jing Jiao said, "Though the ocean and the sky seem to be vast, they have their boundaries. But that world is truly a boundless space. You can't find a foothold there. You have no reference, no companions, no origin, and no destination. This is the beginning of the true fear." After a moment of silence, Zhao Leu asked, "Her Tao heart grows silent, and her loneliness grows?" "That's right. In that world, the projection of the self in the spiritual world will be magnified many times, and will gradually devour the self." Jing Jiao continued, "What she fears is the infinity and herself in the infinity." Zhao Leu understood what he meant, asking, "Why did you tell me all this?" It was believed that Jing Jiao hadn't told anyone about the ascension of the immortal Jingyang, the fairy men, and the secrets of that world, except for her. This kind of trust or expectation brought her a great deal of pressure. "You'll go to that world someday. It's not a bad thing to know something in advance." Jing Jiao said it as if her ascension was inevitable. Zhao Leu felt even more pressured. Over the last 1,000 years, Bai Run and Jingyang were the only two ascendants in Chaotian. Though she had natural Tao quality and was confident in her cultivation, she didn't dare be so optimistic. Jing Jiao put down the wooden comb and began to braid her hair. He did it with only his right hand, and his movements were quite easy. He only told Zhao Leu this because he had another reason. For instance, she had nothing to do with the past. In other words, he didn't completely trust Lu Ci and Yuan Shijing, but he trusted her very much. It was because she was his personal disciple whom he had chosen in the snow in Zhaoga City, and she hadn't forgotten him even after she became a disciple of Aoyama. As someone with natural Tao quality who was nurtured by the Green Mountain sect, she didn't need to do anything to have a bright future. However, she still took the risk to investigate that matter, just to seek justice for him. During the inherited sword competition, she was the target of all the masters, and even Lu Ci and Yuan Shijing wanted to take her on as their personal disciple. Yet, she chose to climb Shinma Peak and continue his inheritance. Even though she was wounded all over, she still pressed forward. As far as he was concerned, it would be unreasonable if little Leu couldn't ascend with her talent and temperament, and she had inherited his cultivation methods and sword methods. As far as he was concerned, little Leu, with her talent and temperament, and having inherited his cultivation methods and sword work, couldn't ascend. It would be an unreasonable thing. As far as he was concerned, it would be unreasonable if little Leu couldn't ascend after inheriting his cultivation methods and sword methods, given her talent and temperament. "What should we do now?" Zhao Leu asked worriedly as she turned her head to look at his tightly clenched left hand. Byron couldn't have predicted that Jingyang could survive after falling from the fairy world and that the fairy book she left behind would be in his hands. All of this was a coincidence, not a planned scheme. Yet, it was still a severe test for Jingjiu, and it could be said that it was a matter of life and death. There was only one option for him: to temper the fairy book. Otherwise, the fairy awareness in the fairy book would slowly infiltrate his body and Tao heart until it occupied them. However, it was not so easy to temper the fairy book. Jingjiu behaved calmly when he told Lu Xi that he wanted to temper the fairy book, but Lu Xi could tell that he was not confident about it. In the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror, when he reached out his hand toward the bronze tripod, he had already sensed that the fairy energy hidden in the fairy book would have a formidable power if it were released. Even those in the heavenly arrival state would have a hard time resisting it. It was extremely difficult to temper the fairy book without touching the fairy energy in it. The most difficult part was that the fairy awareness left behind by Byron was in a very high state, much higher than all the cultivation practitioners in Chaotian. I might have to ask a friend for help this time. Jingjiu looked up at the top of the manor cave. The blue sky was very deep, devoid of any hint of autumn. He was not talking about the queen in the deep part of the snowland, nor was he talking about the giant in the alien land. Zhao Liu followed his line of sight and looked up at the sky. She felt puzzled, but more curious. A few years ago, in order to solve the problem of the sword ghost, Jingjiu said that he would ask his friend for help. At the time, Zhao Liu, Gu Qing, and the others all wondered why Jingjiu had a friend. What had happened later proved that Jingjiu did have a friend, and his friend was the last king of the underworld. Zhao Liu really wanted to know who he was going to find this time, and what kind of earth-shattering figure that person would be. Jingjiu knew what was on her mind. "He is dead," said Jingjiu after a moment of silence while looking at the sky. The twilight enshrouded the Guocheng temple. The pine forest was as red as the fire in the stove, and the pagoda forest shone brightly. There were hundreds of stone pagodas of various heights in the pagoda forest, where the highly achieved monks of the Guocheng temple were buried. But it was tranquil instead of gloomy. Sitting on the stone steps in front of the meditation room, Insan pressed the bone flute to his lips and played a soundless tune with his fingers. It was quiet and tranquil, devoid of any sorrowful intent. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect walked out from the room and stood behind Jingjiu. He listened to Jingjiu play the soundless tune in silence before he spoke. "The person in the fiend prison is Jingjiu. Why didn't you inform the Zhongzhou school of this?" Insan put down the bone flute, wiped it with his sleeve, and put it back into the sheath on his waist. If they couldn't even figure this out, how could the center sect have occupied the spiritual source of the cloud dream for 30,000 years? He replied. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect rubbed his reddened nose as he said, "But we can tell them the true identity of Jingjiu." The corners of Insan's mouth curled up slightly, letting out a mocking smile as he said, "Over the years, many details related to him have told us the same thing. It's like he is standing on the top of the Shima Peak and shouting that he is Jingyang. Do you think he intends to conceal his true identity?" The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect sighed. "If the two immortals could figure out what's on their minds, I wouldn't have been defeated so badly back then." Insan stood up and said nonchalantly, "He needs other people's opinions and guesses to determine who he is." Hearing this, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect was startled, asking, "Has he lost his memory?" "No," Insan said in a mocking tone. "He is merely evading." Looking at Jingjiu's profile, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect asked with narrowed eyes, "Who is he then?" Insan patted the dust off his face and said, "As I said before, no matter who he is not Jingyang." The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect fell silent for a while before saying, "This is really interesting, but I feel it's a bit sad." Insan walked toward the pagoda forest and soon disappeared into the twilight. Gazing at the twilight, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect revealed a strange expression in his narrowed eyes. He didn't look like an old dog at all, but an old lion that wanted to return to the pride, determined and patient. The evening drum sounded, signaling the time for dinner in the Guocheng temple. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect came to the kitchen in the front courtyard with the food box in his arms and found the fat monk he was familiar with. The two of them hid in a corner under the corridor and opened the food box. A large braised pig trotter leaped into their eyes. There were some fresh perilla leaves on the left of the trotter and some pickled perilla leaves on the right, each with its own flavor. Looking at the trotter, the fat monk couldn't help but drool, saying, "The meat is really fragrant." Everything is going well for him at the Western Ocean, and he won't get tired of eating it. I'm trying to persuade that person to be tempted. His voice was very low, and his words were a bit unclear due to the influence of his saliva, but it was obvious that he wasn't talking about the pork passing through the intestines. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect took a bite of the trotter and tore off about half a gene of the skin and meat. He said vaguely, "It only takes one sword to kill two immortals, flesh and skin, to leave a name in history, to injure the tendons and bones, to shake the heaven and earth, and to fill my mouth with the fragrance. Why shouldn't I be tempted?" The fat monk said with a bitter expression, "You forgot to add salt. What about aoyama?" The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect wiped his greasy face and said disdainfully, "I've pickled it in advance. It's not like he doesn't have a master. Shut up if you don't want to eat. Useless thing." The fat monk thought resentfully, "How can you be so hot-tempered in your current state? That person's master is also a hidden swordsman. Though he's trapped by aoyama on the foggy island in the South Sea, he could be considered to be free and peaceful, unlike you, a hidden swordsman who can only eat meat in the temple and act like a dog every day." Passing through the pagoda forest and the pine forest, passing by the side hall and the side door, Jingjiu arrived at the cliff, where he could see the vegetable garden below. As the sun set in the west, the door was pushed open with a squeak. Xiaoyi walked out with a pot of medicine in her hand. Seeing this scene and hearing the coughing coming from inside the house, Insan raised his eyebrows slightly. Lu Shui came back from the Cloud Dream Mountain, but the little vixen didn't show any joy on her face. It seemed that his situation wasn't good. His problem of conflicting internal qi had gotten better after he started to practice the Buddhist method in the Guocheng Temple, but it started to worsen again in the last 2 years. The Zen master once wrote a letter recommending him to go to Yamatai to learn the Tao method. If he could really master this Tao method, he should be able to completely solve the problem in his body. However, for some unknown reason, Lu Shui didn't go to Yamatai. Insan found out about this matter, and he found it very interesting. The twilight was getting thicker, and the sky was getting darker. Jingjiu suddenly made a decision. He walked to the vegetable garden and pushed open the door. Looking at Lu Shui, he asked calmly, "Do you have wine? I like to drink 2 cups today." Chapter 418. Lu Shui recognized Jingjiu, feeling startled. Soon after, he felt quite delighted, yelling, "Master, no. Senior Master, how are you?" Back when he came to the Guocheng Temple to study the Buddhist methods, he couldn't understand the true meaning of the scripts. It wasn't until he was instructed by Insan that he finally understood the scripts and suppressed the conflicts of Jinqi in his body. After he finished explaining the scripts, Insan had disappeared from his life, which made him miss him very much. Now that he had met him again, he felt quite excited. He thought that Insan must be a highly achieved monk of the Guocheng Temple, so he called him Master reflexively. But on second thought, he thought that since Jingjiu wanted to drink wine, he might have misunderstood and thought that Jingjiu was a highly achieved monk invited by his young master. As such, he called him Senior Master hastily. Insan indicated with a small smile that he didn't need to be overly courteous and sat down by the table. Looking at the sumptuous dishes on the table, he found that the little vixen's cooking had improved a lot. He nodded satisfactorily, saying, "These dishes can go well with the wine." It was then that Xiaoyi walked in with a bowl of food in her hands. She was quite surprised to see Insan. Yet, different from Lu Shui, Xiaoyi was less delighted and more cautious. She didn't wish to see any change in the peaceful days in the vegetable garden of the Zen temple. Glancing at the bowl in her hand, Insan found that it was a bowl of pickled vegetables. The green bamboo shoots and the red-skinned radishes were a good match, exuding a faint sour fragrance. He was even more satisfied, saying, "You can have a bowl of rice after the wine." Xiaoyi bowed to Jingjio with a small smile and placed the pickled vegetables on the table. Then she went to the kitchen and fetched a clean bowl and chopsticks, filling it up. Insan picked up the bowl of wine and had a sip. He found that the wine was ordinary and a bit bland, but he didn't mind it. He drank up the wine in the bowl in one gulp. Lu Shisui refilled the wine in Jingjio's bowl hastily. Insan didn't eat any of the dishes, but drank another bowl of wine. It was interesting that the way he drank the wine was rather generous, but it seemed to him that it was a matter of course. A few years ago, during the turmoil of the fiend prison, the king of the underworld was killed by the old dragon. Jingjio played a piece of music and drank a bowl of wine that evening. He played a piece of music that day, and he wanted to drink wine as well. After drinking 2 bowls of wine in a row, he picked up his chopsticks and picked up half a bowl of his favorite dishes. He ate slowly, occasionally picking up a piece of red radish to clear his mouth. Didn't the young Zen master write a letter asking you to go to the one cottage house? Why don't you go? Insan suddenly asked Lu Shisui. Lu Shisui was certain that San was a Jio, and Jio is Jiowas. And San smiled and said, Jing Lu, Jing Zue Jio. Ewan Wen went on. Jio Jing on. Jio. Insan smiled and asked, "How is your comprehension of the Tao seeking?" Lu Shisui thought about his cultivation in that world and his life as a bodyguard. He found that it was really simple and boring. He couldn't feel anything, so he said apologetically, "No." Insan asked, "What about Jingjio?" Lu Shisui didn't even think about it and said directly, "Young master, it's not much different from outside. It's still the same." After a moment of silence, Insan said, "That's good." On a cliff platform somewhere in the Cloud Dream Mountain, a few golden leaves drifted down along with the wind. Tong Yin stood under the tree and looked at the dreamlike Yin kingdom outside the cliff. No one knew what she was thinking. In his hand was a delicate little wine pot. Every time a leaf fell, he would pick it up and take a sip. The drinking of the cultivation practitioners was not much different from that of the mortals. It was necessary to give them something good as a gift. Ijan had copied the method of roasting fish for Jing Shisui before he went to White Town. Jing Shisui had roasted hundreds of fish according to the method, but he still couldn't taste the same, so he had to give up. At the moment, the gifts he used to give the wine were not the yellow leaves drifting down with the wind, but the few go pieces in his left hand. The go pieces rubbed against each other and turned in his palm, producing a clear and deep sound that was pleasing to the ears. As far as Jing Shisui was concerned, it was no different from a delicious dish. Jing Shisui played chess less and less because he found it boring. Nobody in the world could defeat him, and he couldn't defeat Jingjio no matter how hard he tried, either in the real world or in the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror. Yet, the way Jingjio played chess was still as boring as before. He would only think of drinking wine when he was bored, so he didn't use Zhen Yuan to alleviate his boredom. As the 70th yellow leaf drifted down, Jing Shisui finally felt tipsy. It was a good feeling to feel like a fairy. Tong Yin thought that it was unnecessary for mortals to cultivate so hard after ascending to become a fairyman. All the mortals needed was a few jars of wine. Was it really worth it to pay so much for the elusive path toward heaven? Jing Shisui leapt up from the railing with a wine jar in his hand and traveled with the wind. After traveling in the clouds and fog for a long time, he arrived at a remote and secluded valley. This place was the periphery of the Cloud Dream Mountain and close to the Forbidding Formation, so few disciples of the Zhongzhou school would come here. It was probably for this reason that Lo Huainan built her secret manor house here in secret. Tong Yin walked in after activating the 3 layers of the forbidding formation of the manor house with a wine jar in his hand. The light belt made of crystals was illuminated by the fresh wind, illuminating the simple and clean furnishings inside. This secret manor house had fallen into Jing Shisui's hands after the death of Lo Huainan. The immortal Tan and Bai Junren must have known what Jing Shisui had done in secret, so they responded with silence. As such, they didn't pay any attention to this small manor house. Tong Yin walked to the front of the stone table and remained silent for a while. There had been a small green bottle here, which was the last resort prepared by Lo Huainan for his yuanying. But he had died here. Tong Yin poured some of the wine in the wine jar onto the ground, and then sat down to drink it slowly. As time went by, Jing Shisui became more and more drunk. As he leaned against the stone table with his hands supporting his forehead and was about to fall asleep, he suddenly heard sound. The sound was very weak, like the flame of a candle in the strong wind. It seemed that it would be extinguished at any moment. Tong Yin raised his head abruptly, his eyes extremely bright. He didn't seem to be drunk at all. This place was remote and secluded, close to the great formation of Cloud Dream, and the manor house was isolated from the outside world by the forbidding formation. But why did he hear the sound? The sound was very close to him, as if it was in his heart. Was it the work of the devil men of the deviant sex? Tong Yin thought indifferently. Even the saintess of the Bloody Demon Church didn't have such an ability, and neither did the royal concubine who in the imperial palace. Jing Shisui believed that this was not an illusion, and he wasn't drunk. He listened attentively with the Zhen Yuan in his ear. After a long while, his earlobe quivered slightly, and he finally heard the sound again. The sound was very weak and trembling, as if it was extremely cold, and he seemed to have heard it somewhere before. He listened in silence. After a long time, he finally understood what the voice was saying. Young man, save me. The young man playing chess is me." Tong Yin raised his eyebrows so hard that they seemed to be raised. He recognized whose voice it was. It was the spirit of the green sky mirror. It was the young girl named Qin. The young girl had come out to play with him when he was a child, and they met again in the small building in the Huin Valley a few days ago. After the Dao competition was over, he asked his master to go to the Huin Valley to see her, but his master didn't allow it. It was true that the green sky mirror was in the Huin Valley, but why did her voice ring out in his heart? Was it because he had drunk too much? Was it because he had suffered a setback in the chess playing, and what had happened to Lo Huainan, that he had a heart devil? Tong Yin's face suddenly turned pale. It wasn't because he had drunk too much, nor was it because he was afraid of the heart devil. It was because he had clearly heard Qing Er's mournful cry again. He had figured something out. The voice didn't come from his heart. It came from a crack in the manor cave. Nobody knew that there was a secret passage in this secret manor cave of Lo Huainan that could lead to the deep part of the great formation of Cloud Dream. The crack in the stone was the entrance to the secret passage. Why did the weak voice come out from there? Was it because the green sky mirror was suppressed in the deep part of the Earth's source? The green sky mirror was a true heavenly treasure, and its status in the Zhongzhou school was similar to that of the unicorn and the dead old dragon. Only the two masters could make such a decision. What kind of mistake had the young girl committed that she had to be punished like this? Tong Yin had a deep understanding of the chess playing, and his calculating ability was very strong. It took him only a short time to find out the truth, and he concluded that it was not something he could meddle in. He put the alcohol jar on the stone table, got up, and headed for the outside of the cave without hesitation. Sensing his departure, the voice in the deep part of the underground had gradually faded away. Everything returned to a deathly stillness and despair. As Tong Yin arrived at the entrance of the manor cave, he tossed out a jade board with a wave of his hand. The jade board shot out a flash of light, heading toward a place on the Cloud Dream Mountain, carrying a spiritual awareness that he had transmitted to Bai Zhao. "I've comprehended something in the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror, so I've decided to stay behind closed doors to cultivate. I don't know when I'll be able to do it." He turned around and walked back to the deep part of the manor cave, where he set up another protective formation. After that, he walked to the front of the stone wall, remaining silent for a long time while staring at the crack in the stone. Soon, he came to the second conclusion. It was basically impossible. The Earth source was connected to the great formation of Cloud Dream. If he wanted to sneak into the deep part of the Earth source, he couldn't employ any magic methods. Otherwise, he would be discovered. A heavenly treasure like the green sky mirror must be guarded by someone, or even the divine animal unicorn. Even if he could reach the deep part of the Earth source, what could he do? He couldn't come to the third conclusion. For a person as intelligent and meticulous as he was, there were only two situations where he didn't need to think about it. One was that he couldn't figure it out no matter how hard he tried, and the other was that he couldn't get a good result no matter how hard he tried. As such, he didn't need to calculate at the moment. He could just do it directly. Tong Yin took off his clothes and folded them carefully before putting them on the bed. He then walked to the front of the stone wall. His steady hands landed on the hard stone wall, as if he were grabbing a piece of tofu, and he dug out a large piece of rock noiselessly. Soon, the crack in the stone had become a hole that he could crawl into. The sand and rocks piled up like a small hill on the ground. Though it looked fast, it was still too slow considering the distance between the deep part of the Earth source and the ground. Tong Yin had calculated that it would take him about 12 years to dig to the deep part of the Earth source. This fact did not make him flinch at all. He continued to dig in silence. For the cultivation practitioners, staying behind closed doors for 12 years was a normal thing to do. Winter had arrived. The great formation of Aoyama opened as usual, welcoming the first snow, the second snow, and the third snow. On the top of Shima Peak, the stone door of a manor cave opened. Jingjiu walked to the cliff's edge with his hands folded behind his back. He looked at the peaks in the wind and snow, his left hand still clenched. The snow fell down noiselessly. Tingguang Peak, Shanghai Peak, Sword Peak, Shilai Peak, and the peaks were all as usual. The scenery in front of him was no different from the scenery he saw when he decided to leave for Zhaoga City a few years ago. Yet, he could vaguely hear the music coming from Qingrong Peak not far away. Appreciating the snow and the plum blossoms was always different. The inherited sword and the sword trial on Qingrong Peak hadn't done well in recent years, which had something to do with Nan Wang's connivance. Jing Jiu shook his head. Looking at the white flagpole in the snow, he flicked his right hand slightly. Huh! The white cat bounced up from the thick snow and meowed angrily, the white hair all over his body standing up like arrows. As he was about to tear the intruder apart, he found it was Jing Jiu, so he had no choice but to give up. He suddenly felt the scene was familiar, tilting his head to one side in bewilderment. The 5 pieces of Thunder Soul would have already returned to Shinma Peak from the sword jail, but Jing Jiu didn't let Ada go back to Bihu Peak. It was obvious that the immortal sect master didn't agree with Jing Jiu using the principal guards of Aoyama as a guard cat, but he was too afraid of death to care about it. Jing Jiu said, "Ada, get ready to go to a place with me." He had to tell the cat that he needed to get ready. The place was very far away and would take a long time to get there. The white cat was furious, wondering if he would have to do it again. It would be fine if he traveled the human world with Jing Jiu to bully people and treat them as his ancestors, but he would encounter either the old dragon or the godly swordsman of West Ocean. Who could stand it? Besides, the Thunder Soul would have just been brought back. Was he going to give it to a dog again? Jing Jiu persuaded the cat last time by using the word fight. The word fight was used to describe the fight between dragons and tigers. This time he used a place name. I'm going to the Guocheng Temple. The Thunder Soul will be sent back to Bihu after the Ming Road. Lucy I will look after in person. After a moment of silence, the white cat meowed once to express his agreement. As far as he was concerned, he had no hope of ascending, so all he could think about was prolonging his life, and it would be best if he could live as long as heaven and earth. The Zen sect were the best in this aspect. He had wanted to go to the Guocheng Temple to listen to the scripts, but he hadn't had a suitable opportunity. Gu Qing and Yuan Chu heard the commotion and walked out of the manor cave, bowing to the man and the cat. Jing Jiu said to Gu Qing, "Hold the cat and follow me." It was the same way they walked from Zhaoga City to the West Ocean. Gu Qing had no time to ask. He walked to the front of the white cat, bowed again, and reached out his hand. Seeing this, Yuan Chu felt envious, wondering how many disciples of Aoyama could hold the principal guard and travel the human world. However, Gu Qing was the personal disciple of Jingjiu, and Jingjiu was the senior master's nephew, so he couldn't fight for anything. Unexpectedly, the white cat didn't allow Gu Qing to hold him. He waved his paw to ask Jingjiu to stand further away, showing a disgusted expression. Zhao Lei walked to the edge of the cliff and said while staring into Jingjiu's eyes, "Let me do it." The white cat nodded incessantly. "Okay," said Jingjiu. After leaving a letter for Yuan Chu to pass to the other side, Jingjiu left Shinma Peak with Zhao Lei and Zhao Lei holding the cat. The thoughtless sword was too conspicuous, so they used the iron sword. They landed in Cloudy Town after a short flight and left after having a hot pot dinner. They didn't ride the sword for the rest of the journey, but on foot. The white cat lay in Zhao Lei's bosom, thinking that it was a good journey, and it didn't matter if the mountain path was bumpy. The mountain path passed through a small village, and they came to the top of the mountain. Looking down, they could see the house that was getting bigger and bigger. Lu's father was busy doing some chores in the courtyard, his hair still black. It seemed that he was still in good health after so many years. Lu's mother came out with a little boy in her arms and a little girl about 5 or 6 years old in her hand. Lu's father walked over and said something to them, and the whole family laughed. It was a very happy and harmonious atmosphere. Zhao Lei looked down and asked, "Does Lu Shui know?" "I don't know." Jingjiu took out a magic pill and handed it to Zhao Lei, saying, "Melt it in the water jar." The scenery of the pond in the village is not bad. Wait for me there. The white cat lifted his head and looked at the light snow falling from the sky, thinking that it was enough to stand by the pond in the middle of winter and enjoy the scenery. Zhao Lei agreed and came to the village with the cat in her arms. She put a magic pill in the water jar of the Lu house, and then walked to the pond and looked at the water. The snowflakes fell on the water and disappeared instantly, as if they had never existed. She was close to the middle state of free travel, and for mortals, she was a real fairy. Even if she stood by the pond, nobody could see her. The white cat sensed her nervousness, so he meowed softly, trying to comfort her. Zhao Lei looked at the snowflakes falling on the water, saying nothing. Jingjiu made sure that nobody was watching him, not in the sky or underground. He walked out of the small village and went back the way he came. Lu's parents had given birth to 2 more children. The big tree by the pond looked old. It had been 23 years. He passed through the wild forest and walked for a long time before he finally came to the bank of the stream. It was here that he cut wood to make a fire and dried his clothes for the first time in his 2 lives. Snow fell in the stream, and the pond upstream was covered with thin ice. But it was not frozen because of the waterfall falling from the mountainside. Jingjiu went against the waterfall and entered the mountainside. He passed through an extremely dark passage and arrived at the manor cave. The bright pearl in the manor cave was shining, illuminating the stone bed and the 2 cattail hassocks in front of it. That person was still lying on the stone bed, with his face covered by a layer of immeasurable fog, which looked like thousands of stars. No one could see his face clearly. Jingjiu walked to the front of the bed and said, "There must be something wrong with the formation. Let's make sure weather by run has struck or not today." Chapter 419. The man on the stone bed had been dead for many years. The belt made of the flood dragon's tendons had completely decayed and broken into several pieces on the bed. However, the body had not decayed. Under the tattered clothes made of natural silk, there were cracks everywhere, and ink-like old blood stains were smeared on them. It looked a little weird. In places like Aoyama, Zhongzhou, and Ozawa, the first step of cultivation was to refine the body and refine the qi. The higher the state, the stronger the body. For example, the disciples of the undefeated state of the Aoyama sect could be said to have a body as strong as steel. But when people die, their Tao disappears. Without special treatment, the body of this man was not decayed even after more than 20 years, which was very rare. No one knew how high the state of this man was before he died. Jingjiu did not untie the iron sword on his back. Instead, he stretched out his fingers and drew dozens of virtual lines around the cave residence, setting up a small sword formation with the inherited heaven sword. Because of the lower state and the conflict with the inherited heaven sword, this sword formation was not as good as the one set up by Lu Ci in the House of Peeled Skin on the Cloud Dream Mountain, but it was still strong enough. After finishing these things, he sat down on a rush cushion and put his hands on his knees in silence. He loosened his left hand slightly, and a tiny gap appeared between his 5 fingers. A pale golden light overflowed from the gap and was about to go out of the cave, but it was trapped by the sword formation and could not leave. The fairy aura was only 1,000th of the total fairy aura in the longevity fairy puppet. It was still a little difficult for him to control it with his current state. His face suddenly turned pale. He knew he had to speed up, so he released a divine thought to fall on the body. When the body came into contact with his divine thought, it suddenly vibrated as if it was about to come back to life. Of course, this was an illusion. Jingjiu was using his divine thought to replace the body to exercise his qi, trying to force out those things that were suppressed in the depths of the Taoist heart and internal organs. It did not take long for a dozen light spots to float out from the wounds on the body of the body. If one looked carefully, you would find that those light spots were also pale golden, and they were actually fragments. But because they were too small, they looked like light spots. Jingjiu raised his right hand to smooth out the fairy energy seeping out from the fairy book of longevity and spread it evenly in the air in front of him, forming a thin golden sheet. Then, he employed the sword formation to force the light specks onto the thin golden sheet, looking like a craftsman trying to inlay a jade stone on a golden leaf. When those fragments fell on the sheet of fairy aura, they only trembled a little and then calmed down, even more so than in the body of the body. Seeing this scene, Jingjiu confirmed his guess. Jingjiu did not stop his movements. Instead, he kept looking at the sheet. His eyes, which had always been calm and clear, just like the water in of a well. In Mountain, he had a body. He didn't know if it was the immortal qi and fragments that were reflected in the depths of his eyes, or if he himself was in high spirits. In short, it was as if a sun had suddenly appeared in the depths of the sea. In a sense, it was the innate formless sword physique, which meant that his eyes were naturally sword eyes. Under such a pair of eyes, nothing could hide from them. After looking at it for an unknown period of time, Jingjiu slowly closed his eyes. He raised his left hand and retracted the immortal qi. At the same time, the light fragments returned to the corpse. This immortal qi was only 1,000th of the immortal qi in the immortal puppet. It was still very dangerous for him to do this. After all, Lu Ci was not by his side, and Ada was still by the pond. He did not open his eyes and began to meditate to recover. Then, in the darkness before him, countless shooting stars suddenly appeared. That was not a true meteor, but a flying immortal sword. Tens of thousands of flying swords were burning amidst the stars. This was a scene he had seen with his own eyes. Note, he had said this to the king of the underworld and the fiend prison. Apart from that, he saw many other things. Then, he discovered that there was a faintly discernible thread in his body that was pulling him. There was nothing on the other side of the line. The nothingness in the star domain wasn't true nothingness, but a world that couldn't be seen. It might be extremely profound, or its level might be too low. In those worlds, even the speed of light is very slow. Jingjiu turned around and found that the nothingness was the place he had come from, Chaotian. Something had gone wrong with his ascension. The formation of dispersed smoke and clouds on the top of Shinma Peak hadn't been able to cut off all of his mortal relationships. The thread could be called the cause and effect, or it could be said to be the remaining murky energy in his body. Someone didn't want him to leave. Yet he didn't care about it. He was ready to cut off the thread and forge a few fairy books to send back to Aoyama, and then go to another world. He would seek a way to dispel the murky energy during his journey, and he hoped to see more sceneries. It was difficult to cut one's own mind with a sword, so he used the lone sword. His body and mind were the same. As the sword fell down, the sneak attack arrived. Tens of thousands of flying swords in the distant star domain turned into a beautiful firework in his eyes. Jingzhou opened his eyes and fell silent for a while. The fairy energy in the fairy book of longevity was the same as the remaining fairy energy in the corpse. As such, he was certain that the person who had sneak attacked him was the fairy lady Bai Run of the Zhongzhou school, who was known as the great master Bai in the cultivation circle of Chaotian. Jing Jiu stood up and said calmly while looking at the person on the bed, "Damn her ancestors." Tai Ping Jinren learned how to cook hot pot in Izhou back then, but he didn't learn how to cook hot pot after eating it. All he learned was a few words of Izhou dialect. He didn't expect it to be useful that day. The snow was still falling in the mountain village, but it hadn't accumulated yet. The children in the village didn't like playing in the snow as much as the children in the city did. As such, nobody was by the pond. Zhao Liu held the white cat tightly, looking at the road at the entrance of the village in the wind and snow without blinking her eyes. It wasn't until the figure of Jing Jiu appeared in front of her that her tense body finally relaxed, and the white cat felt a bit more relaxed. "Let's go," said Jing Jiu as he came before her. Zhao Liu wanted to ask him if he had seen that friend, but she didn't dare ask. Seeing his left hand still clenched tightly, she asked tentatively, "Are we still going to the Guocheng temple?" Jing Jiu said, "As I said, I'm going to ask a friend for help." When they arrived at Cloudy Town, the iron sword broke through the air and soon entered Nana City. They headed eastward along the muddy river from Chaonan City to Machio. The iron sword traveled at a very high speed. It was even faster than one could imagine. Correspondingly, the oncoming chaotic wind was also very formidable. Even a regular swordsman in the free travel state would be blown to the ground in a daze and fall. Standing at the head of the sword, Jing Jiu looked at the satin-like ocean in the distance, his hair tousling slightly and his expression calm, as if the ferryman in the painting was about to come back to life. Sitting behind him with the cat in her arms, Zhao Liu lowered her head to look at the precipitous peaks and the plain that looked like white carpet flashing by, thinking that it was too fast. The sword light flashed in the high sky, alerting many cultivation practitioners and demons. But seeing the terrifying speed of the flying sword and sensing the undisguised sword will of Aoyama, they all thought that it was an elder in the broken sea state of Aoyama traveling, so they didn't dare to peek at it. Occasionally, some cultivation practitioners encountered the sword in the sky, but they would stay far away from it and bid farewell to it respectfully. This misjudgment saved them a great deal of trouble. If they knew that the person on the iron sword was Jing Jiu, it would cause a disturbance because of the fairy book of longevity. Those highly achieved swordsmen of the deviant sects and the demons might not be able to see through the formidable power of that white cat. Boom! A white airflow appeared in the sky above Machio. The airflow was connected from top to bottom, forming a hollow circle. In the middle of the circle, the black iron sword appeared. The iron sword slowed down and lowered its height. It was much closer to the ground, and the scenery and people in the picture were much clearer. Machio was close to the East Sea. The climate was warm and humid, but not hot. Besides, the land was fertile. Even in winter, there was no snow on the ground, and some fields even had green crops. Large tracts of farmland were divided into countless colored blocks according to their colors. Looking from the sky, it was pleasing to the eye. Compared with the strange peaks in the snowfield, it was less wild and more peaceful. There was a straight road in the middle of the vast farmland, leading to the temple and the Zen temple built against the mountain. The road was full of cars, and there were many temporary tents. Some people were even sleeping on the ground. They were all patients who came to the Guocheng temple for treatment. Many monks in simple frocks were busy walking among them. The iron sword landed in front of the woods, in front of the Guocheng temple. The white cat jumped down from Zhao Liu's arms, which was rare. It spread its 4 feet on the ground, lowered its back, and stretched itself with sincerity. Jing Jiu picked it up and put it on his shoulder. It felt a little uncomfortable, so it climbed up again. Looking at the eaves of the yellow temple that was getting closer and closer, Zhao Leu asked, I understand that doctors are benevolent and monks are trying to overcome adversity, but will it delay my cultivation? Jing Jiu said, Zen cultivates the heart. For the monks who follow this path, this is cultivation, which is better than reading scriptures. This young master's words make sense. It seems that he must be from some famous sect. The reception monk of the Guochang temple came forward with a smile. Although Jing Jiu had achieved success in cultivation, he still looked like the young man in white, and his face had not changed. Seeing Jing Jiu's face, the reception monk couldn't continue praising him. When he saw a white cat lying on Jing Jiu's head, the corners of his mouth couldn't help but twitch a few times. Who is this guest? Ah, is it immortal Master Jing Jiu from Aoyama? The reception monk finally figured out who the guest might be. Jing Jiu uttered The reception monk looked at Zhao Leu again and found that the girl was delicate and lovely. Her white clothes were as clean as snow, and her black hair was braided. She was very beautiful. He thought that since she could travel side by side with immortal Master Jing Jiu, who was known for his indifference, she must be fairy by Zhao from Zhongzhou School. Two young powerhouses of the righteous came to visit at the same time. What happened? No matter which temple the reception monk was from, they were always quick-witted and quick-witted. The Guocheng temple was no exception. He said what he thought. I know fairy by Zhao. The reception monk was stunned for a while before he came to his senses. He felt ashamed and hurriedly saluted. Then he turned to Jing Jiu and said, May I know why the two immortal masters of Aoyama have come? Jing Jiu said, I'm looking for someone. The reception monk thought that the relationship between the temple and Aoyama had always been mediocre, and that the Zen master had always been close to the disciples of Shenma Peak. He said hurriedly, Zen master has gone to White Town. Jing Jiu said, I'm looking for monk Dachong. The reception monk wished he could slap himself. He lowered his head and stretched out his hand, planning not to say another word. Leading Jing Jiu and Zhao Leu into the temple, the reception monk gradually calmed down. He felt that something was wrong. Monk Dachong was a reclusive elder in the back temple. Few people in the outside world knew of his existence. But since the masters in the temple didn't stop him, he wouldn't do anything. Walking through the halls of the front temple and the quiet stone path in the forest, they saw a forest of pagodas among the rustling pine trees. Jing Jiu glanced in that direction. After walking for a long time, they arrived at the deepest part of the Guocheng temple. The forest here was even more secluded, and there was no chirping of birds. Finally, they saw a meditation hall. The meditation hall didn't occupy a large area, and its architecture looked ancient. Compared to the meditation halls and sutras along the way, it looked new. The reception monk escorted them to the meditation hall and didn't dare to enter again. Jing Jiu and Zhao Leu walked into the meditation hall and saw an old monk sweeping the fallen leaves. That old monk was the monk Dachong he was looking for. Monk Dachong was surprised, asking, What can I do for you two? Looking at the old monk, Jing Jiu recalled his appearance 300 years ago. I'm Jing Jiu, said Jing Jiu casually. The emperor should have told you. Monk Dachong said with furrowed brows, I don't know the relationship between you and the emperor, but I work for the royal family. Just tell me what to do. I want to meditate here, said Jing Jiu. Here? Asked Monk Dachong in surprise. Jing Jiu didn't pay any more attention to him. He walked to the backyard of the meditation room, stepping on the fallen leaves. There were a few meditation rooms and 2 ponds, surrounded by roof corridors and a small pagoda in the middle of the courtyard. The small pagoda was made of gray stone, covered with moss, looking rather inconspicuous. Standing in front of the pagoda in silence, Jing Jiu didn't speak for a long time. Seeing this scene, Monk Dachong felt it odd, but he didn't want to cause any trouble and left the courtyard soundlessly, thinking of the royal decree issued by the emperor many years ago. Zhao Leu walked to his side and stood by his side. This is the pagoda of the late emperor, said Jing Jiu. Zhao Leu had vaguely guessed something, but she was still surprised. The late emperor abdicated by faking his death and became a monk in the Guocheng Temple. It turned out that the legend that had been spread in Chaotian for more than 200 years was true. Chapter 420. Looking at the ordinary-looking small stone pagoda, Zhao Liu wondered who would know that the emperor of the previous generation was buried in it. Jing Jiu said he liked to live a simple life since he was a child. If he had a choice, he wouldn't have been the emperor in Zhaoga City for so many years. Zhao Liu lifted her head and asked Jing Jiu, "Is he the friend you were looking for?" At the Shenma Peak, Jing Jiu had said that his friend was already dead. Jing Jiu said, "Though it's not accurate, he has always been more like a friend to me." Zhao Liu fixed her gaze on Jing Jiu's clenched left hand, asking, "How can he help you? I haven't come here often, but every time I come, it's the most peaceful place." Looking at the stone pagoda, Jing Jiu had a calm expression in his eyes. It was unclear whether it was a shallow feeling or a deep affection. The most difficult part of tempering the fairy book was not the powerful fairy energy, but the fairy awareness left by Ruin. The true fairy awareness couldn't be destroyed by the magic methods of the human world. It would infect the Tao heart like the spring rain on the night and the candlelight on the beam. Both the Tao heart and the Zen heart were hearts. Only when one's heart was as tranquil as the water could one resist the infection. This small stone pagoda, the setting sun in the pagoda forest, the ancient temple illuminated by the setting sun, the morning bell and evening drum in the temple, and the recitation of scripts in the rustling pines could help Jing Jiu calm his heart, and then lead the fairy awareness to the place of quietude. This was the reason Jing Jiu came to the Guocheng Temple. The white cat woke up and opened his eyes, looking around the quiet courtyard, feeling a bit perplexed and nervous. He lifted his head and sniffed the air. It was unclear what he smelled, but he gradually calmed down and climbed down from Jing Jiu's body. He didn't jump back into Zhao Liu's bosom. Instead, he walked slowly to the futon in front of the small stone pagoda, curled himself into a circle, closed his eyes, and entered the sweet dreamland again. Seeing this scene, Zhao Liu said after a moment of silence, "In fact, I've always thought tempering the fairy book was impossible, but I have some confidence now." "How is your cultivation state now?" Jing Jiu asked. Zhao Liu said, "Not far from the middle state of free travel." Jing Jiu said, "It's not a good thing to be too fast. I'd better settle down first and listen to the scripts for a few years at the Fruit Formation Temple." In Jing Jiu's mind, little Liu's cultivation state was close to his too fast was too fast. If it were something else, Zhao Liu would definitely listen to him, but not this time. She pressed her lips together stubbornly, not willing to make a sound. Before she entered the Green Mountain sect, she had regarded Grandmaster Jing Yang as her idol and goal to pursue. She regretted that she couldn't live in the same era as such an unparalleled genius. Now that she had such an opportunity, she couldn't let it go. Jing Jiu knew what was on the young girl's mind. He reached out his hand and rubbed her head, saying, "The scripts of the Zen sects are quite interesting. Lu Shui has already learned them. You should learn this lesson first. It will be beneficial for you." Perhaps it was because his calm voice was very persuasive, or maybe it was because his hand was very warm. Zhao Liu finally agreed. "When are we going to visit Lu Shui?" she asked. Jing Jiu didn't understand. He had just met Shui on the Cloud Dream Mountain not long ago, and he had told her everything he needed to know. Why would she visit him? Seeing his expression, Zhao Liu was certain that he was still the same guy who didn't care about worldly affairs and couldn't deal with worldly affairs. His words and the temperament he exuded were all fake. "His home is in the Guocheng Temple," she said indignantly. "Now that we are here, of course we should visit him. The ways of the world are not important. But it is you who sent Lu Shui to the Guocheng Temple. If you don't visit him, how sad will he be when he finds out?" Jing Jiu understood what she meant after some thought. "I don't know where he lives," he said. "I know," Zhao Liu said seriously while staring into his eyes. It was Gu Qing who was in charge of communicating with Lu Shui in Shenma Peak, and it was Gu Qing who delivered the vegetables to the vegetable garden. Before she left Shinma Peak, it was Gu Qing who told her the address of the vegetable garden and reminded her to remind Jing Jiao to visit it. In other words, without Gu Qing, she would have forgotten about it, and she wouldn't be qualified to instruct Jing Jiao. Of course, she wouldn't tell Jing Jiao about it. The arrival of Zhao Liu and Jing Jiao at the same time alerted the important figures in the Guocheng Temple. Jing Jiao didn't want to deal with these affairs, and he thought that Zhao Liu didn't want to either. As such, he entrusted these affairs to Monk Dachong. Monk Dachong was the vice-chancellor of Taichung Temple in Zhaoge City. He had served the emperor all his life and lived in the Guocheng Temple for 300 years, so it was easy for him to deal with these affairs. Every year, a state duke would come to Zhaoge City to fulfill the vow on behalf of the emperor, and they would live in the temple with the corresponding wooden boards for easy access. Jing Jiao and Zhao Liu came out of the Guocheng Temple with 2 wooden boards in their hands, and came to the foot of the cliff outside the side gate. The sunlight was not warm in winter, and there weren't many green vegetables in the vegetable garden. It looked a bit barren. Standing on the cliff and looking at the vegetable garden, Jing Jiao thought this place was not so good, and even the few clusters of bamboos didn't look vigorous. He wondered why Lu Shui didn't want to go to Yamatai. The winter sun couldn't warm the body, but it could warm the heart. Lu Shui sat on the bench in front of the door, reading the script, and he was embroidering shoes for him. Seeing Jing Jiao and Zhao Liu walking in, Lu Shui felt surprised, but he felt more puzzled. He was fully aware that his young master was so lazy that he wouldn't come to the Guocheng Temple to see him. Not to mention that they had just met a few days ago, and they had spent so many years together in the illusionary realm in the royal palace. He was startled, and she didn't even notice that her finger was pricked by the needle. She hurriedly stood up and bowed to Jing Jiao, and then to Zhao Liu. According to the order of the Shinma Peak, Zhao Liu was the Peak Lord, so she should be in the first place, and he should bow to her first. But he was scared just by looking at Jing Jiao, so she didn't think about it. They didn't need to drink wine to welcome the guests, but they needed to have a meal when relatives came. The table was full of good dishes, and it was extremely sumptuous. Jing Jiao didn't eat, and he casually picked up the green bamboo shoots from the pickled vegetables. He felt it was still a bit sour, so he put down the chopsticks. He couldn't help but feel a bit resentful when she saw his action. She didn't feel better until Zhao Liu ate a whole stewed fish. After the meal, he went out to get new tea for them. Jing Jiao suddenly asked, "Why don't you want to go to Yamatai?" This was the second time he asked this question. Lu Shui lowered his head, saying nothing. Thinking of Zhao Liu's unwillingness to accept his invitation in front of the small stone pagoda, Jing Jiao couldn't help but feel helpless, wondering why she was so stubborn. Zhao Liu got up and walked out of the room, leading He to a place far away so they wouldn't disturb the conversation between the master and the servant. "I won't tell anybody." Jing Jiao made a promise. This was a rare behavior for Jing Jiao. Lu Shui got up and took out a case from a secret passage in a corner of the room. There was a fan and a pen in the case. Looking at the fan, Jing Jiao said, "It's ordinary." Then, he looked at the pen and said with a grave expression, "It's not bad. It must be a powerful magic treasure in Chaotian if it could be evaluated by Jing Jiao as not bad." A buzzing sound suddenly broke out in the room. There were no mosquitoes in winter. Who was making the buzzing sound? Lu Shui suddenly raised his hand helplessly because it was not his will. The silvery sword bracelet on his wrist vibrated at high speed, and the sound came from there. The silvery sword bracelet buzzed like Lu Ada's meowing, reminding Jing Jiao to look at me, look at me. Thinking of the green sky mirror in the Zhongzhou school, Jing Jiao was dissatisfied with it. "Shut up," he said. Lu Shui put down his hand slowly. The lone sword didn't dare make another sound. The atmosphere in the room was full of resentment. Jing Jiao fixed his gaze on Jing Jiao's face and said, "Tell me, a few years ago, a state duke came to the Guocheng Temple to fulfill the vow on behalf of the emperor. I got acquainted with an official and learned that Mr. Yin was a traitor of Yamatai. I heard that he stole the pen of the guard city when he betrayed the study house and was pursued by the scholars of the study house. But I don't think it's that simple. I don't know if Mr. Yin is a good person, but I'm certain that he is a warm-hearted person. Otherwise, he wouldn't have died to save me. Lu Shisui told Jingjiu about what had happened back then. Thinking of the scene in which Mr. Yin turned into ashes and died, he shed tears silently. Back then, the king of the underworld was trapped by this pen and then suppressed by the fairy puppet. If the scholars of Yamatai knew that you had this pen, it would be troublesome indeed. Jingjiu continued, as if he didn't see his tears, so it's better if you don't let them know. Lu Shisui wiped off his tears with his sleeve and said, "But I'm afraid that if I go to Yamatai, I won't be able to stop myself from investigating what had happened to Mr. Yin back then, which would cause trouble for you, young master. Everybody knows the relationship between young master and me, so it's meaningless for you to expel me from the sect." Jingjiu sighed. "You know about it too?" "Yes," Lu Shisui said. "That's why I haven't been willing to go to Yamatai." Jingjiu said, "But the problem of the Jinqi in your body has to be solved. Think about it yourself. If you can't solve it, you'd better go back to the sword jail and ask that dog for help." Lu Shisui said, "I also think it's a good idea. The master dead dog is my senior, so I can't just leave him to die." "You're wrong," Jingjiu said. "Speaking of leaving someone to die, that dog has done the most things besides the old dragon because that's what they do." Lu Shisui was taken aback a little and said, "Young master, it seems that you talk a lot more than before." Jingjiu got up and walked to the outside of the room. "Let's go," he said to Zhao Liu, who was looking at the boring snowy scenery. Jingjiu and Zhao Liu walked to the outside of the vegetable garden and were about to return to the temple along the mountain path. But they found Lu Shisui was following them naturally. Jingjiu uttered, "Young master, since you're going to live in the Guoqing temple for a long time, how can you lack someone to serve you?" Thinking of the past events in Aoyama, Lu Shisui felt much better. "I haven't done this for many years since I left the South Pine Pavilion," he said with a smile. "All right," Jingjiu said after some thought. The door of the vegetable garden was closed. Creak. Chapter 421. As soon as Jingjiu returned to the Fruit Formation Temple, he saw a familiar young monk in front of him. However, this monk's face was darker than before, and he looked more weathered than before. Seeing Jingjiu, the young monk was pleasantly surprised. He uttered an "ah," and then covered his mouth with his hands, not daring to speak. Jingjiu had always been indifferent to others, but somehow he felt happy to see this young monk. Perhaps it was fate. "We meet again," he said with a smile. Seeing Jingjiu greet him, the young monk was even more excited. He nodded his head vigorously and didn't forget to put his palms together in front of his chest. Seeing him behaving like this, Jingjiu felt surprised and asked, "Are you still practicing the vow of silence?" The young monk came back to his senses after a moment of bewilderment. He put down his hands and said shamefully, "I'm used to it." "Where is your master?" asked Jingjiu. The young monk said, "My master went to the snowland with Senior Master Duhai." Jingjiu thought that Zen Master had gone there, and now even the principal justice had gone to help. It was likely that something had happened in the Snowy Kingdom, and it must have been a big one. But he didn't ask anything, because he wouldn't go to the north anyway. The young monk wanted to say something to Jingjiu, but hearing the ringing of the bell outside the temple, he said hastily, "There is an epidemic in Yu County. I have to go now." He stopped after a few steps and turned his head to ask, "How long will you stay in the temple?" Jingjiu said, "A long time." The young monk was delighted. He bowed to Zhao Liu with a silly smile and ran out of the temple gate. "Young master, do you know him?" Lu Shisui was curious why Jingjiu knew a common monk doctor in the temple. Zhao Liu said, "When we left Aoyama for the first time to travel, we met this monk and his master in Chounan City. They are not bad people." Lu Shisui recalled that he was about to betray the mountain gate and pretend to be a fool in the stone room on Tianguang Peak. He couldn't help but smile. It was all in the past. He had read the scripts in the Guoqing Temple for 7 years, so he didn't care about it anymore, including his former master by Rujing. After passing through many halls, they returned to the courtyard in the deepest part of the Guoqing Temple. Feeling surprised, Lu Shui asked, "Do you live in the Tranquil Garden?" "Is it called the Tranquil Garden?" asked Zhao. "Do you know this place?" A few years ago, State Duke came down to fulfill a vow on behalf of His Majesty. Those officials lived outside the Tranquil Garden. Lu Shui pointed to a place outside the Tranquil Garden where a dozen buildings could be vaguely seen in the forest. Entering the Tranquil Garden, Monk Dachong was sweeping the fallen leaves again. It seemed that he did not intend to keep the small stone pagoda absolutely clean. Lu Shui greeted Monk Dachong and looked around curiously. Finally, he fixed his eyes on the small stone pagoda and asked, "Young master, what's this?" Zhao Leu answered, "This is the pagoda of the former emperor." Lu Shui was shocked speechless. After a while, he said, "So the legend is true. His Majesty faked his death to cultivate Buddhism here." Zhao Leu ignored him and looked at the 3 roof corridors in the courtyard. She was trying to figure out which one had better light so that she could leave it for Jingjiu. "I don't know what the emperor's Buddhist name is here. Even he has a pagoda to live in. It's really..." Lu Shui walked to the front of the stone pagoda and sighed with emotion. Then he saw the white cat sleeping in front of the pagoda. He was slightly startled. "What is this cat? Guarding? Lord White Ghost." He bowed quickly and solemnly, not daring to be careless. Since Lu Shui walked into the Tranquil Garden, the sound had never stopped, like countless leaves falling from the branches and floating in the air. Monk Dachong felt the disciples of Aoyama were interesting but also troublesome, so he couldn't help but sigh. When Lu Shui talked, it was Zhao Leu who took the initiative to answer. Even so, Jingjiu still couldn't stand it. "I forgot to ask. I asked Zen Master to teach you the vow of silence. Why are you still so talkative?" Lu Shui said blankly, "I don't know. Zen Master didn't tell me." Jingjiu thought the little monk was really not reliable. Zhao Leu was a little worried. Zen Master had left the Guoqing Temple for the north, which meant something must have happened in the snowy country, and he couldn't help them. Jingjiu didn't care. The little monk had a profound understanding of the Buddhist Dharma, which would be helpful for him to refine the fairy book. But he was too smart. If they met too many times, he would definitely be recognized. Of course, it was not a big deal to be recognized, but it was a little embarrassing. Back then, outside Jingyang's fake immortal's cave, he had to rely on Zen Master's lotus cloud to avoid Fong Jingtian's killing intent. He still couldn't forget the way he called him little friend. Life in the Guoqing Temple began in this way. The courtyard of the Tranquil Garden was really quiet. Birds chirped in the distance, and no cicadas chirped in the deep winter. Monk Dachong, Zhao Leu, and Jingjiu each occupied one of the 3 roof corridors. Besides sweeping the fallen leaves, Monk Dachong sat on the futon and meditated. But he was too old, so he spent most of his time basking in the sun and taking a nap. Zhao Leu sat on the futon, with dozens of Buddhist scriptures piled up beside her. She read them carefully, and occasionally closed her eyes to meditate. Sometimes the white cat lay in front of the pagoda, but most of the time it lay on her knees. Occasionally, it would crawl into the pile of fallen leaves swept by Monk Dachong and sleep. Jingjiu didn't read the Buddhist scriptures, nor did he meditate. He took out the bamboo chair and lay on it. It suddenly rained. The white cat crawled out from the pile of fallen leaves and returned to Zhao Leu's side, lying there quietly. It was deep winter, but the Guoqing Temple was close to the East Sea. The weather was warm, and the Zen was hidden in the mountains. It wouldn't snow unless the cold wave came from the north. Lu Shui finished his inspection and preliminary cleaning of the Tranquil Garden. He found a teapot, a small stove, and other related things, and began to boil tea in the corridor. The water in the teapot would make a purring sound before and after it boiled. Whether it was in the pile of fallen leaves or on Zhao Leu's knees, the white cat would often purr. Lord White Ghost is so cute. Lu Shui thought about this, and stole a glance at the cat from time to time. When the tea was ready, it was divided into 4 bowls and placed in front of each of them. The rain was pitter-patter. The fragrance of the tea was diluted by the rain, but it was even more fragrant. Lu Shui sat cross-legged in a corner of the roof corridor and began to meditate and cultivate. After a while, the rain stopped, and the ancient temple was shrouded in the twilight. He opened his eyes and woke up. He cleaned up the tea stove and the bowls and went to the room to tidy up. Just like in the South Pine Pavilion, the so-called service was just these small things. "Young master, I'm leaving." "Okay." In the twilight, Lu Shui walked out of the Guocheng temple and returned to the vegetable garden. With a squeak, the door was pushed open cheerfully. Xiaoyi said happily, "I thought you weren't coming back." Lu Shui smiled and said, "There's only one bed in the guest room in the tranquil garden. I can't sleep in it." The look in Xiaoyi's eyes changed slightly, and she said in surprise, "Immortal masters? Isn't it said that Immortal Master Jingjiu and Fairy by Zhao are a couple? What are you thinking? Young master likes to sleep in the bamboo chair." Lu Shui said with a smile. Then he remembered that the bamboo chair was indeed a little old, and his sight fell on a corner of the vegetable garden. There were a few bamboos growing there, which he asked Gu Qing to find a way to move from Tianguang Peak. He didn't know whether it was because of the soil and water or some other reasons, but they didn't grow as well as they did in Aoyama, and he didn't know if they were suitable to repair the bamboo chair. 5 days later, in the early morning, the faint sound of a bell was heard. Jingjiu stood up from the bamboo chair and left the tranquil garden with Zhao Leiyu, walking toward the temple. Today was the day of the lecture hall, and Master Qingjia would give a lecture in person. The Guocheng temple was very large, and there were halls, meditation rooms, and stone pagodas everywhere. Jingjiu walked freely among them, looking very familiar with the place. The lecture hall was a large hall. At this time, dozens of monks had already gathered, wearing robes that represented different generations. They sat on cattail hassocks, making no sound. Seeing Jingjiu and Zhao Leiyu walk into the hall, the monks were a little surprised. After all, this was the inner temple. Why were these two benefactors here? A monk knew the identities of Jingjiu and Zhao Leiyu, so he said something to them in a low voice. Then his gaze fell on Master Qingjia, waiting for his decision. Master Qingjia was also a little surprised, wondering if these two really came to the temple to listen to the sutras. Both the Aoyama sect and Zhongzhou school were the leaders of the orthodox sects, so the Guoqing temple would give them enough respect. However, the lecture hall had never allowed outsiders to stay here. Thinking of the relationship between Zen Master and Shinma Peak, Master Qingjia smiled and shook his head, indicating that it was fine. Jinren Jingyang was half a teacher to Zen Master. Today, it could be considered a little repayment. Jingjiu and Zhao Leiyu walked to an inconspicuous corner. Back on the chessboard mountain, Zhao Leiyu had reminded him that he had to pay attention to such occasions, so he didn't bring a bamboo chair and sat on a cattail hassock like the other monks. The sutras in the Guocheng temple did not have any opening remarks, and began with 3 clear chimes of the stone bell. Master Qingjia's voice was a little low, like the ringing of a bell, extremely mellow. Today, he was lecturing on the 7 ginseng scriptures of the celestial tree, which was quite obscure. His monotonous voice echoed in the lecture hall, which had the effect of helping people sleep. The dozens of monks sitting on the cattail hassock listened quietly, looking very serious on the surface. Some of the young monks with insufficient realms couldn't help but secretly pinch their thighs a few times to dispel their sleepiness. However, Zhao Leiyu listened very attentively without a moment of distraction. Her eyes became brighter and brighter, and the black and white became more distinct. She was very spirited. An hour later, there were 3 clear chimes of the stone bell again, and the sutras came to an end for the time being. Most of the monks were still sitting on the cattail hassock, continuing to comprehend the master's explanation. Some of the monks stood up and went to the locust tree outside the lecture hall, either to practice boxing or to look into the distance to recover some energy. Zhao Leiyu looked at these scenes and smiled slightly. Thinking of the scene of the Tao competition in Zhongzhou school described by Gu Qing, she thought that if Zhuoruzhui were here, he would probably fall asleep in no time. Then she looked at Jing Jiu beside her, wanting to ask him something, but found that his eyes were closed and his breathing was long and steady. He had actually fallen asleep. What sutras are they listening to? Lu Shui went to the tranquil garden and found that neither Jing Jiu nor Zhao Liu were there. He went to ask Lord White Ghost, but it ignored him. So he went to disturb Monk Dachong and found out that they had gone to listen to sutras. He had already read and interpreted those sutras, so there was no need for him to listen to them again. So what was he going to do today? He went back to the vegetable garden and chopped a few bamboos. Then he returned to the tranquil garden and started to repair the bamboo chair. Monk Dachong walked to the courtyard and started to sweep the fallen leaves. Seeing Jing Jiu's increasingly proficient movements, Monk Dachong mused with a smile, thinking that these disciples of Aoyama were really interesting. What do you carry the fallen leaves till after you sweep them every day? Master, please do these things for me in the future. Sensing the gaze of Monk Dachong, Lu Shui said while repairing the bamboo chair, I heard from my young master that you used to be the chief of Taichung Temple in Jiaoga City, but your family name is Dachong, except that it's a little less. It's really interesting. The expression on Monk Dachong's face changed slightly, thinking that it was not interesting at all. He didn't want to pay any more attention to Jing Jiu and continued to sweep the fallen leaves with the bamboo broom. Lu Shui turned his head around and said concernedly, Your broom looks a bit old. I happen to bring some bamboos with me today. Do you want me to make a new one for you? Monk Dachong felt helpless, thinking that it was no wonder that Jing Jiu asked Jing Jiu to learn the vow of silence. Lu Shui didn't need an opponent to talk. He continued repairing the bamboo chair with his head lowered as he murmured incessantly. Monk Dachong sighed, and the wrinkles on his face grew deeper. Looking at the small stone pagoda, he wondered if the emperor should move to another house since it was so noisy here. The peaceful and happy life was always the same. Every day was the same as the day before, except that it rained sometimes and the wind sometimes. There were futons and bamboo chairs under the roof corridor in the tranquil garden. 3 people and a cat were sitting, lying, or crouching on the ground. Sometimes, the white cat would go out for a stroll when he was tired of crouching on the ground. This was the Guocheng Temple after all, and there were many taboos here, so he wouldn't go too far. Every 5 or 10 days, there would be a master giving a lecture in the scripture lecture hall. Jing Jiu would take Zhao Liu there to listen. Once, the white cat was so bored that he went with him. He found the lecture very interesting and listened to it carefully. The bamboo chair had been repaired. On the days when Jing Jiu and Zhao Liu were listening to the scripture lecture, Lu Shui would stay in the vegetable garden and finish all the farm work that he had accumulated over the past few days. He could also exercise his muscles and bones. However, the winter was getting colder, and the internal qi in his body showed signs of relapse. He coughed more often, which worried Xiaohe. Yin San was also reading the scripture in the meditation hall, beside the pagoda forest in the Guocheng Temple. This place was quite far from the tranquil garden and the scripture lecture hall. Moreover, he had always been proud of his profound knowledge of Buddhism and disdained to listen to the teachings of those juniors. So he had never been there. Apart from reading the scripture, what Yin San did the most was to sit on the stone steps of the meditation hall and bask in the winter sun. What the great grandmaster of the mysterious sect did the most was to steal meat from outside the temple. He often ate until his mouth was covered in grease. Occasionally, Yin San would take out the bone flute and play a soundless tune. The great grandmaster of the mysterious sect stood behind him, rubbing his reddened nose and looking into the distance, lost in his silent thoughts. Yin San didn't know that Jing Jiu was here. Jing Jiu didn't know that Yin San was here either. In the history of the Aoyama sect, this pair could be considered the most legendary senior and junior brother in the history of the cultivation world. They spent their time together in the Guocheng Temple, unaware of each other's presence. One day, Yin San raised his head and looked out of the pagoda forest. Suddenly, his eyes were filled with green, and he realized that spring had arrived. He smiled, and his Tao heart was slightly moved. He knew that he would definitely be able to solve the problem of his body. Then he thought of Lu Shui. One winter had passed, and he wondered if that little fellow's cough had gotten better. Chapter 422. Pushing open the door, San didn't see Lu Shui, only Xiaohe. He said with a smile, "I'm here to ask for a meal." Xiaohe was a bit surprised. She invited him to sit down and went to make arrangements. She was not as vigilant against this mysterious senior as before, because she had too many things to worry about, such as Lu Shui's health and Jing Jiao, who was living in the Guoqing temple. The dishes were still sumptuous, but the wine was different. San put down the bowl and said with a smile, "It's not easy to get the strong ale on the Thunder Island." Standing aside, Xiaohe clutched the hem of her clothes nervously. Good wine suddenly appeared on the table at home. Apart from a friend coming from afar, the other possibility was that he needed someone to do something for him. San was a very casual person. He drank the wine, ate the dishes, and talked casually. He will go back to Aoyama one day. How will you solve your identity as a vixen? After a moment of silence, Xiaohe said, "If it doesn't work, I will leave." San said, "A vixen is easily moved, good at making decisions, and knows how to weigh the consequences. Since you are willing to give up your identity, you must have a big plan. Do you want him to be the sect master?" Xiaohe knew she couldn't hide it from this swordsman, so she said, "Senior, you are right." San shook his head and said, "He will never be the sect master of Aoyama." Xiaohe's face turned pale, asking why. "I know Aoyama. People with his experience can't be the sect master unless he can do what I did. But can he?" Looking at the stewed fish in the big bowl, San said calmly, "He can't, so he can't be the sect master." Xiaohe's face was pale, but she calmed down a lot, as if she relaxed after a moment of despair. She said in a low voice, "He said that immortal master Jing Jiao also thinks so." Hearing that name, San raised the corner of his mouth and said, "At least he didn't forget about it." Xiaohe asked, "What do you suggest?" In her opinion, since Lu Shui could not be the sect master of Aoyama, he might as well live an ordinary life in this vegetable garden. However, she also knew that this was just wishful thinking. One day, Lu Shui would leave this place and even leave her. The world is huge. Why is it restricted to that Aoyama? Even if you leave this place in the future, you can go to other places or even other continents. This was San's true feelings. If not for the mountain in his heart, he would have left long ago. Thinking of the past, he extended his chopsticks toward the pile of green spinach on the plate, like a sword about to pierce through an Aoyama. Ever since immortal master Jing Jiao came to the temple, he has been following him every day, just like in the past. In the future, with just a word from immortal master Jing Jiao, he has to return to Aoyama. How can he leave? Thinking of her life these days, Xiaohe felt a little bitter. San's chopsticks suddenly stopped in the air, saying, "I don't like spinach the most. It's too bitter." Xiaohe didn't understand what he meant, but she suddenly felt the room became extremely cold. That breath came from San's body. Xiaohe knelt down with a thud, her face pale and her body trembling slightly. San's breath wasn't very powerful, but it made her feel extreme fear. It was just like when her left shoulder was pierced through by Jing Jiao in the Ocean God Temple outside Haizhou City. The front of the Guochang Temple had a backyard, a front temple, and a large piece of farmland outside. Along the road, there were endless sheds. The front temple could be used for burning incense, praying to the Buddha, and conducting rituals. The backyard was where the monks of the temple meditated. The pagoda forest was very quiet, and the location was also very remote. Because most of the spiritual pagodas were gray, the meditation room closest to this place was called White Mountain. San sat on the stone steps of the White Mountain meditation room, looking at those stone pagodas in silence for a long time. The great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect came back from outside, wiping his mouth. Seeing this scene, he found a bit strange. San often sat on the stone steps to bathe in the sun, but there was no sun today. And with the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect's cultivation state, he could tell that Jingjiu was in a strange mood today. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect asked cautiously, "Immortal, what happened?" Insan said in a bitter voice, "I didn't know that Jingjiu was in the Guocheng temple." The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect had been trying to guess who was Insan's spy in the Guocheng temple, and it seemed that the spy had gone to the north with the principal justice. Then, he came to his senses and realized what he had heard. He fell in his silence, and his nose became even redder. The crow's voice came from the depths of the pagoda forest. "What is he doing here?" The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect asked in a low voice. "There's something wrong with that fairy book," Insan said. He couldn't solve it in Aoyama, so he came here to seek the Buddhist method to free himself just like me. After a moment of silence, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect suddenly walked toward the meditation room, saying, "There are some Buddhist scriptures that I haven't read yet. I'll take them with me on the way." Insan lifted his head to look at the crows flying out of the pagoda forest and asked calmly, "Why do you want to leave?" The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect halted his steps, saying, "Whether to hide or to kill, I have to leave after all." What he said was very reasonable. Insan said, "I've come here to seek the Buddhist method to free myself, and I haven't obtained the true scriptures yet. How can I leave?" The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect walked back to his side and asked tentatively, "So you killed him?" Insan said, "I wanted to kill him in the first place. Now that he has delivered himself to my door, why shouldn't I kill him? This is too vulgar, and it doesn't match the bearing of the immortal." The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect said with a thick face, "And didn't you say that he wasn't Jingyang? Why should I kill him?" Insan said, "If he wasn't Jingyang, he had to die." "Why?" asked the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect with a cold expression. If it were any other matter, he would bark like a dog at Insan's request. But he couldn't do it this time because he needed a reason. Zen Master had gone to White Town, and the chief monk stayed behind closed doors, so nobody in the Guocheng temple could resist his mysterious dark demonic style. Even if he killed Jingjiu, his identity would be exposed, and the two important figures of the Aoyama sect would hunt him down. Would he have to hide in the dark underground again? Insan said, "I don't like him. What do you think of this reason?" The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect shook his head and said seriously, "Not really." Insan suddenly stood up and walked toward the pagoda forest, saying, "I'm just kidding. Based on his temperament, he must have that cat with him. How can it be so easy to kill him?" Looking at his back, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect asked, "Should we hide for now?" Insan didn't stop walking, saying, "Let's wait and see first." The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect suddenly had an ominous feeling, saying in a low voice, "Immortal, are you going to see him?" Insan didn't say anything, stopping in the pagoda forest. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect finally felt relieved. Insan took out the bone flute and drew dozens of lines on the ground between the pagodas. Those lines formed a complicated pattern, which seemed to be a formation. The cawing of the crows was heard in the sky, and the cold wind was blowing. The fallen leaves rolled in from outside the pagoda forest, covering the lines and making them invisible. There was no master preaching in the instruction hall that day, so Jingjiu was in the tranquil garden. He was lying on the bamboo chair with his eyes closed, listening to the sounds coming from the wind, his ears twitching slightly. This pair of jutting ears could hear all the sounds carried by the cold wind. It was all the sounds in heaven and earth, including the chanting of the monks, the sound of the followers' foreheads touching the ground in the grand hall, and the sound of the incense burning. Normally, his jutting ears should be very conspicuous, but everyone who saw him would be attracted by his face, so it was difficult to notice them. Listening to the sounds in the wind, Jingjiu placed his right hand on the armrest of the bamboo chair, tapping it from time to time. Sitting by the bamboo chair, Lu Shisui stared at Jingjiu's fingers, adjusting the circulation of Zhen Yuan in his body according to the rhythm. More than 20 years ago, Such a scene often happened by the pond in the small village. Jingzhou's fingers suddenly stopped, and then he opened his eyes, gazing out of the tranquil garden. The sounds in the wind were a bit messy, but Jingzhou noticed it even though it was only for a moment. Jingzhou's fingers moved again, but this time they moved much faster, leaving behind countless afterimages. Lu Shui didn't notice that Jingzhou had opened his eyes, thinking that it was still the rhythm. The Zhen Yuan was in a mess and stopped immediately. Looking out of the tranquil garden, Jingzhou had a slightly strange expression in his eyes. Even when it came to matters related to the fairy book of longevity, Jingzhou could get a general direction by calculating. But why couldn't he figure anything out this time? Lu Shui thought Jingzhou was worried about the fairy book, saying, "I know a master in the Guocheng temple. I wonder if he is your acquaintance, young master." Jingzhou pulled back his gaze, picked up the teacup, and took a sip, shaking his head. Jingzhou had only one acquaintance in the Guocheng temple, who knew a few highly achieved monks, but Jingzhou didn't know anyone. Lu Shui realized that it was the Zen master who had helped him, saying, "That master has a profound understanding of the Buddhist scriptures. He has helped me interpret many difficult scripts. Do you want him?" Jingzhou put the teacup back on the table, shaking his head again. In the roof corridor on the other side, Zhao Liu was reviewing the script she had read the day before, pondering over the difficulties in the swordwork. She unconsciously stroked the white cat on her lap and occasionally rubbed its belly. Hearing what Lu Shui said, she said, "How could an arrogant person like him think that anyone in the world is qualified to teach him? Distance produces beauty, and it can also produce awe. If one was too familiar with someone, the beauty would be gone, and so would the awe." This principle was applicable to both cats and humans. Her attitude toward Jingzhou grew more and more casual, almost returning to the first 2 years of their relationship. The white cat didn't feel offended. It hummed comfortably and then purred. In the end, it simply turned over and faced the sky with its belly. Jingzhou didn't say anything. He raised the teacup and remembered that he had just drunk it. Lu Shui poured another cup for him hastily. It was getting late, and it was probably time to go home. Ensign stood up from the stone steps and dusted himself off, preparing to go to the vegetable garden to have a meal. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect asked, "You're still going?" "I'm going to take a look," Ensign said. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect asked, "If you really see him there, are you going to kill him right away?" Ensign shook his head and said, "Since he thinks he's Jingyang, he won't go to the vegetable garden because it's meaningless for Jingyang. So I won't run into him." "Then what are you going to do there?" the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect asked. Ensign didn't explain. He left the Guocheng temple right away and went to the vegetable garden. The time he chose was really good. Lu Shui was eating with Xiao He in the room. Since he wasn't a senior invited by the young master, Lu Shui naturally wouldn't tell him about the young master. He didn't expect that Ensign would bring it up on his own. Ensign drank a bowl of wine and said, "I know what Jingzhou is doing. I might have some methods. You can go and ask him if he wants to learn." Lu Shui was a bit alarmed, saying, "I'm not sure, but I can go and ask him." Ensign took out a few pieces of paper and handed them over, saying, "Don't tell him who I am. If you don't believe me, just don't tell him. If he doesn't believe me, just don't use it." The next morning, Lu Shui entered the Guocheng temple with a new top-grade tea and the pieces of paper sent by the Guqing's family. Jingzhou took the pieces of paper and looked at them. He found that the handwriting was quite strange, but the sentences were somewhat familiar. More importantly, that person's method was quite reasonable. It wasn't comprehending the Zen and interpreting the scriptures. It was tempering the fairy book. Chapter 423. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect was in a bad mood lately. His nose was getting redder, and his hair was getting thinner and thinner, and he kept silent for a longer time. He couldn't even smile when eating pork trotters and pickled basil leaves. In his eyes, it was too risky to do so, regardless of the hidden meaning or conspiracy in the letter of the immortal. If Jing Jiao could figure out who he was, he would have to attack him. Killing Jing Jiao, Zhao Jiao, and Lu Shisui would reduce the top fighting force of the young generation in Aoyama, which would be beneficial to the revival of the deviant sects in the future. But what should he do now? Dozens of days had passed, and it was late spring. The White Tower was often wet by the rain, and the pine forest grew greener. Insan went to the vegetable garden again, where Lu Shisui happened to be. Lu Shisui handed the crumpled paper back to Jing Jiao and said embarrassedly, "Young master said, it's useless to take it for granted." Insan wasn't angry, saying with a faint smile, "Really? It looks like he has done some research on the Buddhist methods. I wonder if he can help me solve some problems?" Having said that, Jing Jiao took out another paper from his sleeve and handed it to Jing Jiao. It was late spring, and the summer was coming. The cicadas were chirping in the Guoqing temple, and the tranquil garden was not as quiet as before. The white cat lifted his head under the eaves and glanced at the outside of the garden, wondering why these annoying little creatures outside were so different from Cold Cicada, who was not obedient at all. After reading the paper handed to him by Lu Shisui, Jing Jiao was lost in thought. Then he also felt the chirping of the cicadas was a bit annoying. He waved his sleeve a few times, and a gust of gentle wind passed through the hall and entered the forest. A moment later, the chirping of the cicadas stopped. "What should I say in return?" asked Lu Shisui. "I need to think about it," said Jing Jiao. It took him a long time to think about the answer. It was easy to imagine that the question on the paper was not an ordinary one. The person who could raise such a serious question was certainly not an ordinary person. "Is that person very skilled?" asked Zhao Leu. Jing Jiao uttered him. "Why didn't he come to the tranquil garden with Shisui?" Zhao Leu asked. "The monks have many eccentricities," said Jing Jiao. "For instance, Zen master likes playing with mud and wooden sticks, and the chief monk of the Guoqing temple seldom comes out to meet people. He likes copying the Buddhist scripts." Zhao Leu said, "Since that person knows about the fairy book, he must have a high status at the fruit formation temple. Maybe he is the chief monk." After a moment of silence, Jing Jiao said, "No, he might have been the chief monk." "No, Jing Jiao Mountain sect Master Temple. Sect Green Jiao Monk Yin sect Gu Jiao sect." After reading the letter, he sat on the stone steps of the white mountain meditation room and watched the stars for the whole night. The great ancestor sat beside him and waved his palm leaf fan for the whole night. He was certain that Jing Jiao had vaguely guessed the problem of the formation of dispersed smoke and clouds. Could he believe what Jing Jiao wrote in the letter? Insan remained silent for a long time. He didn't reply to the letter, and he didn't go to the vegetable garden again. Their communication was cut off. The chanting of scripts could be heard everywhere in the Guoqing temple, and the fruits and vegetables in the vegetable garden were plentiful. Zhao Leu's cultivation state was getting more and more stable. It was believed that she would enter the middle state of the free travel in another 2 years and create another record for the Aoyama sect. The Jinqi in Lu Shisui's body was much calmer now. It seemed that he wouldn't be in danger for the time being. Jing Jiao and the white cat slept well. Time elapsed. It was another winter. It was a severe winter this year. The chilly wind from the snowland roared down to the south. Even the Guoqing temple, which was close to the East Sea, was greatly affected. It snowed a few times. The Zen temple was exceptionally beautiful in the snow, attracting many mortals to appreciate the snow, recite poems, and paint. Monk Dachong was still persistent in sweeping the ground. He didn't allow the fallen leaves to accumulate, nor would he allow the snow to accumulate. The tranquil garden was cleaned thoroughly. Jing Jiao felt a little bored, so he moved into the room from the corridor with others and the white cat. The crackling sound of the silver coals came from the stove, and the water in the teapot was snoring. Lu Shisui and Zhao Leu were sitting by the wall on both sides, adjusting their breathing and cultivating with their eyes closed. Jing Jiao was lying on the bamboo chair in front of the window with a white cat in his arms, looking at the scenery outside dyed white by the snow. The scenery was limited to a small window, but it had a more profound meaning, because the observer would usually be more focused. His sight fell on his left hand, feeling the seemingly endless fairy aura and the fairy awareness that couldn't be erased, and he was lost in thought. In the evening, the faint sound of firecrackers came from the distance outside the temple, and it never stopped. Zhao Leu asked curiously, "Are the villagers driving the mountain beasts away?" Jing Jiu was speechless, saying, "It's snowing heavily in the middle of winter, and there's no grain in the fields. The wild beasts are either hibernating or migrating to the south. Why would they come down the mountain? The firecrackers are going off endlessly, so it's obvious that something serious has happened. Someone in someone's family might have died." Zhao Leu was enlightened, saying, "I see." In fact, Lu Shisui's line of sight moved back and forth between their faces, feeling a little embarrassed as he said, "It's because it's the New Year's Day." Jing Jiu said after a moment of silence, "The New Year's Day is quite lively." Zhao Leu turned her head away, not wanting to continue the conversation. Lu Shisui took the opportunity to say, "Xiao, he has cooked many dishes." Jing Jiu and Zhao Leu refused the suggestion of going to the vegetable garden for the New Year's Eve dinner. They were becoming less and less interested in such matters. The firecrackers went off incessantly. Even though they were far away, the sound could still be heard by them. For some reason, Jing Jiu didn't choose to shield his six senses, even though it was something he was good at. It wasn't until it was very late at night that the sound of the firecrackers finally stopped, and the night sky illuminated by the firecrackers returned to its tranquil darkness. Monk Dachong had already fallen asleep. There was no sound or light in the tranquil garden. Jing Jiu opened his eyes. It was the time when the new year and the old year intersected, and the momentum of heaven and earth was at its strongest. The fairy energy came from outside heaven and earth, so it was at its weakest under the suppression of the momentum of heaven and earth. A sword will emerge from inside Jing Jiu's body, enveloping the entire room. He reached out his right hand and dipped it into the sword will, writing a script in the air. Then he clenched his left hand into the script and slowly closed his eyes. Nothing unusual happened. It was like a clay ox sinking into the sea or a spring rain moistening the night. After a long time, he opened his eyes again and looked at his left hand with a satisfied expression. "What do you think?" Zhao Leu's voice rang out. Jing Jiu turned his head and said, 10%. In the darkness, Zhao Leu's eyes lit up. Her black and white eyes were distinct and beautiful. It seemed slow to refine 10% of the fairy awareness in more than a year, but it was actually very fast. If it were any other cultivation practitioner, it would be impossible for Jing Jiu to refine the fairy awareness in his cultivation state. Admiration welled up in her heart. She bowed to him. This was the first time she had bowed to Jing Jiu as a disciple. "Happy New Year to you too." "No red envelope," Jing Jiu said. He didn't have much an idea about the new year, but it wasn't that he didn't understand it. It was the same as why Zhao Leu bowed to him. There was no need for conversation or explanation. No matter how dark the night was, they would know each other's intention when their eyes met. Zhao Leu sat by Jing Jiu's side and snuggled in his bosom, showing that she was very attached to him. No one had ever seen her act like a little girl before. She hadn't seen her like this in Jiaoga City, her colleagues in Aoyama, and even her parents, except for Jing Jiu. She would only let Jing Jiu see her like this. Chapter 424. If he didn't stay behind closed doors for a long time, Baizeo would have one meal with his parents every year, and it was only one meal, right under the cloud platform tree. There were only some simple dishes on the stone table. The roasted fish was left untouched, and the immortal Tan and Bai Junren left after drinking only one cup of wine. After a moment of silence, Baizeo came to the foot of the tree and looked at the ocean of clouds outside the cliff, thinking that it would be more lively if Big Brother Tong Yen were here. Staying behind closed doors was the norm for the cultivation practitioners, but she was still worried. It was because Tong Yan's decision to stay behind closed doors was too sudden. She was also worried about another matter. The fairy book had fallen into the hands of Jingjio, but the Cloud Dream Mountain didn't show any reaction. Her mother behaved so calmly, making her feel uneasy. She intended to write a letter to Aoyama and ask about it, but she gave up the idea in the end. She sighed softly and waved the white satin lightly. Countless snow-white natural worm silks fell down like the snowflakes, sealing the cloud platform. Tong Yin dug a tunnel under the ground. He used the magic method to crush the soil and rock chips he had dug out. After the soil and rock chips had shrunk, he piled them up neatly on both sides, looking like stone balls. There was no light in the tunnel. It was dark everywhere, so it was impossible to tell the time of day and night. Yet, as a cultivation practitioner, he knew that more than a year had passed. It would take many years before he could reach the deep part of the earth source. He behaved calmly and silently, because nobody could talk to him here. That indistinct yet incomparably real pressure had always been in front of him, far away, high up in the sky. The unicorn wouldn't leave the Cloud Dream Mountain. If he got close to the green sky mirror, he would be discovered by the unicorn. What should he do then? There was no need to calculate things that he couldn't figure out. He would think about it later. Looking at the underground river in front of him, he wondered if he should take a bath to celebrate the arrival of the new year. In the deep part of valley, the clouds and fog shrouded the sky, making it look like the milky white. There were a dozen stone posts amid the clouds and fog. Bai Jinren stood on a stone post with his hands folded behind his back, looking at the distance. It was unclear what he was thinking. A huge black shadow appeared in the depths of the clouds, as if a mountain had suddenly appeared there. Zhongzhou School's guardian mythological beast, Qilin. The clouds suddenly stirred. Light and dark alternated, forming several lines of vertical words that appeared in front of Bai Jinren. It was the Qilin's divine sense. I can sense that the immortal sense left behind by the ancestors is dissipating. Although the speed is very slow, this is something that should not have happened. I am very worried. Bai Jinren was still looking into the distance and said, Bulo Lin said very clearly that he is studying Buddhist scriptures in the Guoqing Temple. Maybe he really has a chance of success. If someone could see the scene clearly from the sky, they would know that she was looking towards the southeast. The Guoqing Temple was over there. Qilin's divine sense quickly appeared in the clouds again. I'm going to kill him, Bai Jinren said. The relationship between Guoqing Temple and Aoyama is still unknown. Don't take any risks. Words appeared in the clouds. Will those little monks dare to attack me? Bai Jinren said. You are the guardian ancestor of our sect. According to the sect rules, you can't leave unless you give up your body. The clouds and fog were quiet for a while, and then another line of words appeared. It's enough to kill these little guys. No need, because I don't believe that he can tamper with the fairy book, even if he is really the reincarnation of Jingyang. Bai Jinren said with an indifferent expression, his current cultivation state is too low. Now that winter had arrived, spring arrived as well. Along with a chilly spring rain, the trees in the Guoqing Temple began to sprout. Jingjiu and Zhao Leu lived a peaceful life in the tranquil garden. Lu Shisui spent more time taking care of the vegetable garden, so he didn't forget to ask Jingjiu for advice on the sword work every day. Every few days, Zhao Leu would go to the instruction hall to listen to the master's explanation, and the white cat would often sneak over, lying on the windowsill to enjoy the sunshine and listen to the scriptures. The monks were used to seeing the white cat, so they didn't think it was strange. Sometimes they would tease the cat, which made Zhao Leu very nervous. She was afraid that the cat would suddenly become violent and seriously affect the relationship between the Aoyama sect and the Guoqing Temple. Nowadays, Jingjiu seldom went to the instruction hall. He spent most of his time lying on the bamboo chair, practicing his cultivation in the company of the spring breeze, the spring sun, and the spring rain. His cultivation state hadn't improved, but he had a deeper understanding of the Zen methods and the fairy book. One afternoon, when he opened his eyes and saw the greenery outside the wall, he realized that it was late spring. He glanced at the white cat, intentionally or unintentionally. The white cat had long forgotten how long it had lived. Anyway, except for the old guys like the round turtle and the unicorn, no one had lived longer than it. It had long lost interest in getting horny, but it still felt sleepy in spring, which meant that desire was not the most important thing in life, and lying down was the most important thing. It hadn't rained these days, so the rush cushion in front of the pagoda was very dry. Lu Shui had also spread some carefully selected fine grass for it, so it slept very comfortably. Sometimes it even forgot the knees of a young girl. It opened its eyes and woke up, looking at the sky blankly. It suddenly remembered that there seemed to be a few pieces of paper on this rush cushion in the early spring of last year. It was the same spring sun, the same spring breeze, the same feeling of spring, and the same rush cushion. Only a few pieces of paper were missing. It stood up subconsciously and walked toward the outside of the tranquil garden, smelling the scent floating in the air. It walked past the pond, the dense forest, the small bridge, and the disciples' yard. The sound of people around it gradually rose. It lightly leaped onto the top of the wall, came to the middle of the Guocheng temple along the shadow wall, and then jumped into the pagoda forest. There was a quiet meditation room in front of it. There was no one on the stone steps, nor in the room. It was as quiet as a tomb. The white cat walked to the stone steps, curled up in a circle, and lay down. It closed its eyes and began to sleep. It slept until the sun was setting. Only then did it wake up, wondering what was wrong with it. Back to the tranquil garden, it lay down in front of the small stone pagoda and continued to sleep, but it still couldn't close its eyes. It was troubled by a very inexplicable emotion, so it didn't notice that Jing Jiao was looking at it in silence. The White Mountain meditation room had been empty for a long time. In the kitchen at the front of the temple, a cook, Duda, who rarely appeared, was missing. As for the young man who had never appeared, he was soon forgotten. In the most heavily guarded room of the justice hall, there were 2 monks, one old and one young. These 2 monks were San and the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect. San looked more delicate and even cute after shaving his hair, while the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect looked more wretched after shaving his hair, especially his red nose, which was more conspicuous and annoying. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect rubbed his nose and looked behind San. He could feel it clearly. Ever since he knew that Jing Jiao was in the Guocheng temple, San had been meditating more, but no one knew what he was thinking. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect noticed that there was a slight bulge behind San's neck, and it was slowly changing position. Then he smelled a very faint smell. His expression changed slightly, but he didn't dare to say anything. The smell was very faint and not smelly, but it was very uncomfortable, with a faint smell of rotten leaves like old wood that had been left for many years. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect knew that this body couldn't hold on for many years, and he didn't know if the immortal could find a way to perfectly unify the spirit and the body in 10 years. They had stayed in the Guocheng temple for many years for this purpose. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect's gaze fell on the ground in front of San. There was a piece of paper in front of the rush cushion, on which a few lines were written. Those words were written by Jing Jiao. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect didn't understand. Since the immortal didn't dare to believe his story, why did he place this piece of paper in front of him? In the blink of an eye, another year had passed. When the old and the new met, the power of heaven and earth flourished. The tranquil garden was shrouded in darkness, and only Zhao Leiyu's eyes could be seen. She gazed intently at Jing Jiao. Jing Jiao opened his eyes and released his sword will. He dipped his hand into the sword will as ink and wrote down a scripture. This time, he didn't put his left hand directly into the scripture. Instead, after a moment of contemplation, he chose a few words from the scripture and plucked them off. Ha! The fist and the palm collided. His left hand glowed for a moment and then returned to normal. In the twinkling of an eye, the cycle of life and death had been completed. Jing Jiao closed his eyes again. After a long time, he opened them again and said to Zhao Leiyu, who had come up to him, "It's all right." Zhao Leiyu kowtowed to him. Jing Jiao said, "There's still no red packet." Zhao Liu smiled and said seriously, I can break through the state now. Jingjiu looked at her in silence and said, I think it's better to wait for a few more years. Zhao Liu didn't quite understand. Her initial state of the free travel had been completely stabilized, and her Dao heart and sword will had reached the peak state. Why should she wait? She was dissatisfied with Jing Jiu's lack of explanation, so she didn't sit with him this time. Under the cloud platform tree, there were still those simple fruit trays and cups with only half of the fragrance of wine on them. They couldn't even be called leftovers. Baizeo walked to the cliff's edge and looked at the drifting clouds, thinking that since only his big brother liked to eat roasted fish, he wouldn't cook for them anymore. Big Brother Tong, Yin had been behind closed doors for 2 years. What kind of cultivation method was he cultivating? And what was Jing Jiu doing there? In spring, she finally wrote a letter to Aoyama and received Gu Qing's reply. Gu Qing didn't give any details in the letter. It was obvious that he was hiding something. She turned around and looked at the fruit trays and wine cups on the table, thinking of these things, feeling quite bored. Tong, Yin was still digging a hole in the ground. There was nothing else. The figure of a unicorn could be vaguely seen in the clouds and mist. His spiritual awareness fluctuated and formed words. I feel that he has refined more. If you don't stop him soon, your idea won't come true, and it will bring him great benefits. Bai Jinren stood on the stone pillar, facing the wind, and looked in the direction of the Guoqing temple. After a moment of silence, he said, As I said, you can't leave the central state according to the sect rules. The unicorn's words appeared in the clouds and mist. I can transform and walk. Bai Jinren said calmly, If your cultivation state is suppressed, your supernatural power is less than 1% of your real bodies. A line of words appeared in the clouds and mist. But it's enough to kill him. Even though my supernatural power is suppressed, my divine body is not destroyed. Nobody can hurt me. Bai Jinren drew back his line of sight and said, I won't allow it. The old dragon died because of him. I must kill him. Now that your idea has failed, you should act according to my method. I won't let him have any chance of refining the fairy book. Otherwise, if he gets the fairy energy, he will become a great trouble in the future. The unicorn was furious. The clouds and mist in the deep part of the valley were tumbling restlessly. The words that appeared were as sharp as knives, full of strong, murderous intent. Time passed faster than a poet's pen. Before one could sigh about the passing of time, what should have passed had already passed away. In the blink of an eye, it had been 5 years since Jing Jiu and Zhao Liu came to the Guoqing temple. Recently, Jing Jiu became more and more silent, his face paler and paler, but his eyes brighter and brighter. A hint of gold could be vaguely seen in the deep part of his eyes, adding a touch of devilish charm to his beautiful face. Another new year would come in a few days. That night, Jing Jiu would write the last part of the script and try to refine the fairy book completely. If he succeeded, the endless fairy energy in the fairy book of longevity would belong to him. If he failed, he would be counterattacked by the fairy awareness and become a puppet of the Zhongzhou school at any time. Zhao Liu still didn't understand why Jing Jiu didn't agree to her breaking through the state, but he kept refining the fairy awareness at a faster pace, even at the expense of his sword source and spiritual soul. Why was he in such a hurry? This new year had a special meaning for the Guoqing temple. Duke Lu would come here to fulfill the vow on behalf of the emperor. This was a yearly event, but the scale and level of this year's event were much grander. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.